Good day, folks. I'm Nihilist, and welcome to the second season, first episode of Nyttel's Lost Book Club. Book Club. Excuse me. Can't drop the voice like that for this particular podcast thing. Anyway, what we are doing today is I have a book. It is an actual book that I just flipped the pages on the mic for. It is called Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by A Square. Also, otherwise known as Edwin A. Abbott. Anyway, I'll read you the synopsis on the back of the book. Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions, is an 1884 satirical novella by the English schoolmaster Edwin Abbott Abbott, writing pseudonymously as A Square. The book used the fictional two-dimensional world of Flatland to offer pointed observations on the social hierarchy of Victorian culture. However, Ravel's more enduring contribution is his examination of dimensions. Several films have been made from the story, including a feature film in 2007 called Flatland. Other efforts have been short or experimental films, including one narrated by Dudley Moore in the short films Flatland, the movie, and Flatland 2, Spearland, starring Martin Sheen and Kristen Bell. That's all the back of the book offers. And holy shit, there's 9 people here already? Jesus. Okay. Alright. Let's get to the beginning of the book. What we have on the screen is part of the cover. Not all of it. It doesn't show the main title of it or who the author is. But it does include a drawing that is included in the book. Anyway, we're going to begin. Flatland, Romance Many Dimensions by A Square. Edwin A. Abbott, with illustrations by the author. I may doodle in the background to show off some of these if need be. So, table of contents is it takes 6 pages to actually get to the preface, so I'm going to skip to that. Actually, the dedicated section is fun. To the inhabitants of space in general, and HC in particular, this work is dedicated by a humble native of Flatland, in the hope that even he's initiated into the mysteries of 3 dimensions. Having been previously conversant with only 2, so the citizens of that celestial region may aspire yet higher and higher to the seekers of 4, 5, or even 6 dimensions, thereby contributing to the enlargement of the imagination and the possible development of that most rare and excellent gift of modesty among the superior races of solid humanity. Alright, now, preface to the second revised edition 1884. By the editor. If my poor Flatland friend retained the vigor of mind which he enjoyed when he began to compose these memoirs, I should not need to represent him in this preface, in which he desires, firstly, to return his thanks to his readers and critics in Spaceland, whose appreciation has, with unexpected celerity, required a second edition of his work. Secondly, to apologize for certain errors and misprints, for which, however, he is not entirely responsible. And thirdly, to explain 1 or 2 misconceptions. But he is not the Square he once was. Years of imprisonment, and a still heavier burden of general incredulity and mockery, have combined with the natural decay of old age to erase from his mind many of the thoughts and notions, and much also of the terminology, which he acquired during his short stay in Spaceland. He has, therefore, requested me to reply in his behalf to 2 special objections, one of an intellectual, the other of a moral nature. The first objection is that a Flatlander, seeing a line, sees something that must be thick to the eye as well as long to the eye, otherwise it would not be visible, if it had not some thickness, and consequently he ought, it is argued, to acknowledge that his countrymen are not only long and broad, but also, though doubtless in a very slight degree, thick or high. This objection is plausible, and, to Spacelanders, almost irresistible, so that, I confess, when I first heard it, I knew not what to reply. But my poor friend's answer appears to me completely to meet it. I admit, said he, why I mentioned to him his objection. I admit the truth of your critic's facts, but I deny his conclusions. It's true that we have really in Flatland a third unrecognized dimension called height, just as it is also true that you have really in Spaceland a fourth unrecognized dimension called by no name at present, but which I will call extra height. But we can no more take cognizance of our height than he can of your extra height. Even I, who have been in Spaceland, and have had the privilege of understanding for 24 hours the meaning of height, even I cannot now comprehend it, nor realize it by the sense of sight or by any process of reason. I cannot but appreciate it by faith. Alright, now we're down to 2 people. Cool. Alright, the reason is obvious. Dimension implies direction, implies measurement, implies the more and the less. Now our lines are equally and infinitesimally thick, or high, whichever you like. Consequently, there is nothing in them to lead our minds to conception of that dimension. No delicate micrometer, as has been suggested by one too hasty Spaceland critic, would at least avail us, for we should not know what to measure, nor in what direction. When we see a line, we see something that is long and bright. Brightness, as well as length, is necessary to the existence of a line. If the brightness vanishes, the line is extinguished. Hence, all my Flatland friends, when I talk to them about the unrecognized dimension, which is somehow visible in a line, say, "Ah, you mean brightness." When I say, "No, I mean a real dimension," they at once retort, "Then measure it, or tell us in what direction it extends." And this silences me, for I can do neither. Only yesterday, when the chief circle, in other words our high priest, came to inspect the state prison and pay me his 7th annual visit, when for the 7th time he put me the question, was I any better? I tried to prove to him that he was high, as well as long and broad, although he did not know it. But what was his response? You say I am high. Measure my highness and I'll believe you. What could I do? How could I meet his challenge? I was crushed, and he left the room triumphant. Does this still seem strange to you? Then put yourself in a similar position. Suppose a person of the fourth dimension, condescending to visit you, were to say, whenever you open your eyes, you see a plane which is of 2 dimensions, and you infer a solid which is of 3, but in reality you also see, though you do not recognize, a fourth dimension, which is not color nor brightness or anything of the kind, but a true dimension, although I cannot point out to you its direction, nor can you possibly measure it. What would you say to such a visitor? Would not you have him locked up? Well, that is my fate, and it is as natural for us Flatlanders to lock up a square for preaching the third dimension, as it is for you Spacelanders to lock up a cube for preaching the fourth. Alas, how strong a family likeness runs through blind and persecuting humanity in all directions! Points, lines, squares, extra cubes. We are all liable to the same errors. All like the slaves are respective dimension prejudices, as one of your Spaceland poets has said, "One touch of nature makes all worlds akin." On this point of defense of the square seems to me to be impregnable. I wish I could say that his answer to the second or moral objection was equally clear and cogent. It has been objected that he is a woman-hater, and as this objection has been vehemently urged by those whose natures decree his constitute the somewhat larger half of the Spaceland race, I should like to remove it, so far as I can honestly do so. But the square is so unaccustomed to the use of the moral terminology of Spaceland that I should be doing him an injustice if I were to literally transcribe his defense against his charge. Acting, therefore, as his interpreter and summarizer, I gather that in the course of an imprisonment of 7 years he has himself modified his own personal views, both as regards women and as regards the isosceles or lower classes. Personally, he now inclines to the opinion of the sphere that the straight lines are in so many important respects superior to the circles. But writing as a historian, he has identified himself, perhaps too closely, with the views generally adopted by Flatland, and, as he has been informed, even by Spaceland. Historians in whose pages, until very recent times, the destinies of women and the masses of mankind have seldom been deemed worthy of mention, never of careful consideration. In a still more obscure passage, he now desires to disavow the circular aristocratic tendencies with which some critics have naturally credited him, while doing justice to the intellectual power with which a few circles have for many generations maintained their supremacy over immense multitudes of their countrymen. He believes that the facts of Flatland, speaking for themselves, without comment on his part, declare that revolutions cannot always be suppressed by slaughter, that nature, in sentencing the circles to infecundity, have condemned them to ultimate failure, and herein, he says, I see fulfillment of the great law of all worlds, that while the wisdom of man thinks it is working one thing, the wisdom of nature constrains it to work another, and quite a different and far better thing. For the rest, he begs his readers not to suppose that every minute detail in the daily life of Flatland must needs correspond to some other detail in Spaceland, and yet he hopes that, taken as a whole, his work may prove suggestive as well as amusing to those Spacelanders of moderate and modest minds who, speaking of that which is of the highest importance but lies beyond experience, decline to say on the one hand, this can never be, and on the other hand, it must needs be precisely thus, and we know all about it. The author desires me to add that the misconception of some of his critics on this matter have induced him to insert in his dialogue with the sphere certain remarks which have a bearing on the point in question, which he had previously admitted as being tedious and unnecessary. Part 1. This World. That was the end of the preface. Part 1. This World. Be patient, for the world is broad and wide, is the quote that comes with Part 1. Chapter 1. On the Nature of Flatland. I'm going to take a drink real quick before I read this, because I'm going to be doing this nonstop. Alright. He's starting to view of the square now. I call our world Flatland, not because we call it so, but to make its nature clearer to you, my happy readers, who are privileged to live in space. Imagine a vast sheet of paper on which straight lines, triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, and other figures. Fuck that. Anyway. And other figures, instead of remaining fixed in their places, move freely about, on or in the surface, but without the power of rising above or sinking below it. Very much like shadows, only hard with luminous edges. And you will then have a pretty correct notion of my country and countrymen. Alas, a few years ago, I should have said my universe, but now my mind has been opened to higher views of things. In such a country, you'll perceive at once that it is impossible that there should be anything of what you call a solid kind. But I dare say you will suppose that we could at least distinguish by sight the triangles, squares, and other figures moving about as I have described them. On the contrary, we could see nothing of the kind, not at least so as to distinguish one figure from another. Nothing was visible, nor could be visible to us, except straight lines, and the necessity of this I'll speedily demonstrate. Place a penny in the middle of one of your tables in space. Leaning over it, look down upon it. It will appear as a circle. But now, drawing back to the edge of the table, gradually lower your eye, thus bringing yourself more and more into the condition of the inhabitants of Flatland. You will find the penny becoming more and more oval to your view. At last, when you place your eye exactly on the edge of the table, so that you are, as it were, actually a Flatlander, the penny will have ceased to appear oval at all, and will have become, so far as you can see, a straight line. The same thing would happen if you were to treat in the same way a triangle or square or any other figure cut out of pasteboard. As soon as you look at it with your eye on the edge of the table, you'll find that it ceases to appear to you a figure, that it becomes appearance a straight line. Take, for example, an equilateral triangle, who represents with us a tradesman of respectable class. Figure 1. I will draw figure 1 for you, actually, because it is there. Figure 1 represents the tradesman, as you would see him while you are bending over to him from above. Figures 2 and 3 represent the tradesman, as you would see him if your eye were close to the level. I'll show you figure 2 as well. Looks roughly like this. And then figure 3. Represent tradesman, as you'd see him if your eye were close to that level. Or all but on level of the table. If your eye were quite on level of the table, and that is how we see it in Flatland, you'll see nothing but a straight line. I will undo those real quick. Put this back into the default position. And we'll summon back the cardboard. Anyway, when I was in Spaceland, I heard that your sailors have very similar experiences when you traverse your seas and discern some distant island or coast lying on the horizon. The far-off land may have bays, forelands, angles in and out to any number and extent. Yet at a distance you see none of these, unless your dear sun shines bright upon them, revealing projections or retirements by means of light and shade. Nothing but a grey unbroken line upon the water. Well, that is just what we see when one of our triangular or our acquaintances comes towards us in Flatland. As there is neither sun with us, nor any light of such a kind as to make shadows, we have none of the helps to the sight that ye have in Spaceland. If our friend comes closer to us, we see his line becomes larger. If he leaves us, it becomes smaller. But still, he looks like a straight line, be he a triangle, square, pentagon, hexagon, circle, what you will. A straight line he looks and nothing else. You may, perhaps, ask how under these disadvantageous circumstances we are able to distinguish our friends from one another. But the answer to this very natural question will be more fitly and easily given when I come to describe the inhabitants of Flatland. For the present, let me defer to subject, and say a word or two about the climate and houses in our country. Chapter 2 of the climate and houses in Flatland. Yeah, chapter was only a few pages. Anyway, get text. As with you, so also with us. There are 4 points of the compass north, south, east, and west. There being no sun nor other heavenly bodies, it is impossible for us to determine the north in the usual way. But we have a method of our own. By law of nature with us, there is constant attraction to the south, and although in temperate climates this is very slight, so that even a woman in reasonable health can journey several furlongs northward without much difficulty. Yet the hampering effort of the southward attraction is quite sufficient to serve as a compass in most parts of our earth. Moreover, the rain, which falls at stated intervals, coming always from the north, is additional assistance. In the towns we have the guidance of the houses, which of course have their side walls running for the most part north and south, so that the roofs may keep off the rain from the north. In the country, where there are no houses, the trunks of the trees serve as some sort of guide, although we have not so much difficulty as might be expected in interpreting our bearings. Yet in our more temperate regions, which the southward attraction is hardly felt, walking sometimes in a perfectly desolate plain where there have been no houses or trees to guide me, I have been occasionally compelled to remain stationary for hours together, waiting until the rain came before continuing my journey. On the weak and aged, especially on delicate females, the force of attraction tells much more heavily than on the robustness of the male sex, so that it is a point of breeding if you meet a lady in the street, always give her north side of the way. By no means an easy thing to do, always at short notice. When you are in rude health, and in a climate where it is difficult to tell your north from your south. Windows there are none in our houses, for light comes to us alike in our homes and in and out of them, by day and by night, equally at all times and in all places, whence we know not. It was in old days of our learned men an interesting and often investigated question, what is the origin of light? And the solution of it has been repeatedly attempted, with no other result than to crowd our lunatic asylums with the would-be solvers. Hence, after fruitless attempts to suppress such investigations indirectly by making them liable to a heavy tax, the legislature, in comparatively recent times, absolutely prohibited them. I, alas, I alone, Flatland, know now only too well the true solution of the mysterious problem. But my knowledge cannot be made intelligible to a single one of my countrymen. I am mocked at. I, the sole possessor of the truths of space, of the theory of the reduction of light from the world of three dimensions. As if I were the maddest of the mad. Let a truce to these painful digressions. Let me return to our houses. The most common form of the construction of a house is five-sided or pentagonal, as in the annexed figure. The two northern sides, I will draw this for you again. Two northern sides, RO, OF, constitute the roof, and for the most part have no doors. On the east is a small door for the women. I'll actually draw actually I won't draw yet. But this is the woman door. And on the west is a much larger one for the men. South side or floor is usually doorless. I will erase all that now. And put back the logo. Alright. Square and triangular houses are not allowed, and for this reason, the angles of a square, and still more those of an equilateral triangle, be much more pointed than those of a pentagon, and lines of inanimate objects, such as houses, being dimmer than lines of men and women. It follows that there is no little danger, lest the points of a square or triangular house residence might do serious injury to an inconsiderate or perhaps absent-minded travelers, suddenly, therefore, run against them. And as early as the 11th century of our era, triangular houses were universally forbidden by law. The only exceptions being fortifications, powder magazines, barracks, and other state buildings, which it is not desirable that the general public should approach without circumspection. At this point, square houses were still everywhere permitted, though discouraged by a special tax. But about 3 centuries afterwards, the law decided that in all towns containing a population above 10,000, the angle of a pentagon was the smallest house angle that could be allowed, consistently with the public safety. The good sense of the community has seconded the efforts of the legislature, and now, even in the country, the pentagonal construction has superseded every other. It is only now, and then, in some very remote and backward agricultural district, that an antiquarian may still discover a square house. As the end of chapter 2. We're 18 pages in already. There are about 120 some odd pages in this book. 122. Anyway, chapter 3. Concerning the inhabitants of Flatland. The greatest length or breadth of a full-grown inhabitant of Flatland may be estimated at about 11 of your inches. 12 inches may be regarded as a maximum. Our women are straight lines. Our soldiers and lowest classes of workmen are triangles of 2 equal sides, each about 11 inches long, and a base or third side so short, often not exceeding half an inch, that they form at their vertices a very sharp and formidable angle. Indeed, when their bases are of the most degraded type, not much more than an eighth part of an inch in size, they can hardly be distinguished from straight lines or women, so extremely pointed are their vertices. With us, as with you, these triangles are distinguished from others by being called isosceles. and by this name I shall refer to them in the following pages. Our middle class consists of equilateral or equal-sided triangles. Our professional men and gentlemen are squares, to which class I myself belong, and five-sided figures or pentagons. Next above these come the nobility, of whom there are several degrees, beginning at six-sided figures or hexagons. And from thence rising in the number of their sides, they receive the honorable title of polygonal, or many-sided. Finally, when the number of sides becomes so numerous, and the sides thus so small, that the figure cannot be distinguished from a circle, it is included in the circular or priestly order. It is the highest class of all. It is of a law of nature with us that a male child should have one more side than his father, so that each generation shall rise, as a rule, one step in the scale of development of ability. Thus the son of a square is a pentagon, the son of a pentagon a hexagon, and so on. But this rule applies not always to the tradesmen, and still less often to the soldiers and to the workmen, who indeed can hardly be said to deserve the name of hidden figures, since they have not at all their sides equal. With them, therefore, the law of nature does not hold, and the son of an isosceles, i.e. a triangle of two sides equal, remains isosceles still. Nevertheless, all hope is not shut out, even from the isosceles, that his prosperity may ultimately rise above his degraded condition. For, after a long series of military successes, or diligent and skillful labors, it is surely found that the more intelligent among the artisans and older classes manifest a slight increase of their third side or base, and the shrinkage of the other two sides. Intermarriages, arranged by the priests between classes, generally result in offspring approximating still more to the type of the equal-sided triangle. Rarely, in proportion to the vast numbers of isosceles births, is a genuine and certifiable equal-sided triangle produced from isosceles parents. Such a birth requires, as its antecedents, not only a series of carefully arranged intermarriages, but also a long continued existence of frugality and self-control on the part of the would-be ancestors of the coming equilateral and patient, systematic, and continuous development of the isosceles intellect through many generations. The birth of a true equilateral triangle from isosceles parents to the subject to rejoice in their country for many furlongs around. After a strict examination conducted by the Sanitary and Social Board, the infant, certified as irregular, is of solemn ceremonial admitted into the class of equilaterals. He is then immediately taken from his proud yet sorrowing parents and adopted by some childless equilateral, who is bound by an oath never to permit the child henceforth to enter his former home, or so much as look upon his relations again, for fear lest the freshly developed organism may, by force of unconscious imitation, fall back again to his hereditary level. The occasional burst of equilateral from the ranks of his serf-born ancestors is welcomed, not only by his poor serfs themselves, as a gleam of light and hope shed upon the monotonous squalor of their existence, but also by the aristocracy at large, for all the higher classes are well aware that these rare phenomena, while they do little or nothing to vulgarize their own privileges, serve as a most useful barrier against revolution from below. Had the acute angled rabble been all, without exception, absolutely destitute of hope and ambition, they might have found leaders in some of their many seditious outbreaks, so able as to render their superior numbers and strength too much even for the wisdom of the circles. But wise ordinance of nature has decreed that, in proportion as the working class increase in intelligence, knowledge shall all virtue. In that same proportion, their acute angle, which makes them physically terrible, shall increase also and approximate to the comparative harmless angle of the equilateral triangle. Thus, in the most brutal and formidable of the soldier class, creatures almost on the level of women in their lack of intelligence, it is found that, as they wax in mental ability necessary to employ their tremendous penetrating power to advantage, so do they wane in the power of penetration itself. How unutterable is this law of compensation, and how perfect a proof of the natural fitness and I may almost say, the divine origin of the aristocratic constitution of the states of Flatland. By judicious use of this law of nature, polygon circles are almost always able to stifle sedition in its very cradle, taking advantage of the irrepressible and boundless hopefulness of the human mind. Art also concerning to the aid of law and order. Art also comes to the aid of law and order, It is rarely found possible by a little artificial compression or expansion on the part of the state physicians to make some of the more intelligent leaders of rebellion perfectly regular, and to admit them at once to privileged classes, a much larger number who are still below the standard, allured by the process of being ultimately ennobled, are introduced to enter the state hospitals where kept in honorable confinement for life, one or two above of the alone of the most obstinate volition, hopefully irregular or led to execution. Then the wretched rabble of the isosceles, planless and leaderless, are either transfixed without resistance by the small body of their brethren, whom the chief circle keeps in pay for emergencies of this kind, or else more often, by means of jealousies and suspicions skilfully fomented among them by the circular party, they are stirred to mutual warfare, and perish by one another's angles. No less than 120 rebellions are recorded in our annals. This, besides minor outbreaks, numbered at 235, they have all ended thus. What need of a certificate? A Spiceland's critic may ask. Is not the procreation of a squire's son a certificate from nature stems herself, proving the equal signness of the father? I reply that no lady of a position will marry an uncertified triangle. Square offspring has sometimes resulted from a slightly irregular triangle, but in almost every case, the irregularity of the first generation emphasis on the third, which either fails to attain the pentagonal rank or relapses to the triangular. Chapter 4. Concerning the women. We're about 1/6 of the way through the book. Oh, I see there was depth there. Oh, wait. If our highly pointed triangles of soldier class are formidable, it may be readily inferred the far more formidable are women. For if a soldier is a wedge, a woman is a needle, being, so to speak, all point, at least at the two extremities. Add to this the power of making herself practically invisible at will, you'll perceive that female in Flatland is a creature by no means to be trifled with. But here, perhaps, some of my younger readers may ask how Owen Flatland can make herself invisible. This ought, I think, to be apparent without any explanation. However, a few words will make it clear to the most on reflecting. Place a needle on the table. Then, with your eye on the level of the table, get a pen here. Look at Then with your eye on the level of the table, look at it sideways, and you'll see the whole length of it. We'll look at it endways, and you'll see nothing but a point. It has become practically invisible. Just so with one of our women. When her side is turned towards us, we see her as a straight line. When the end containing her eye or mouth, for with us these two organs are identical, is part that meets our eye. I will put that back up now. And eye and mouth, which these two organs are divided, is part that meets our eye, they would see nothing but a highly lustrous point. But when the back is turned to our view, then, being only sublustrous, and indeed almost as dim as an animate object, her hinder extremity serves her as a kind of invisible cap. The dangers to which we are exposed from our women must now be manifest to meaning capacity in Spaceland. If even the angle of a respectable triangle middle class is not without its dangers, if to run against a working man involves a gash, if collision with an officer of the military class necessitates a serious wound, a mere touch from the vertices of a private soldier brings with it danger of death. What can it be to run against a woman except absolute and immediate destruction? And when a woman is invisible, or visible only as a dim sublustrous point, how difficult must it be, even for the most cautious, always to avoid collision? Many are the enactments made at different times in the different states of Flatland are to minimize the peril. In the southern, less temperate climates where the force gravitation is greater, humans being more liable to casual and involuntary motions, the laws concerning women are naturally much more stringent. But a general view of the code may be attained from the following summary. 1. Every entrance will have one entrance in the eastern side, for these females only. by which all females enter in a becoming and respectful manner, and not by the men's or western door. No female. 2. No female shall walk in any public place without continually keeping up her peace cry, under penalty of death. 3. Any female duly certified to be suffering from St. Victus's dance, fits, chronic cold, accompanied by violent sneezing, or any disease necessitating involuntary motion, shall be instantly destroyed. Hmm. Definitely is a view of satirical 1884 England. Anyway, in some states, there is additional law forbidding females under penalty of death from walking or standing in any public place without moving their backs constantly from right to left, so as to indicate the presence of those behind them. Others oblige a woman, when traveling, to be followed by one of her sons or servants or by her husband. Others confine women altogether to houses except during religious festivals. But it has been found by the wisest of our circles of statesmen that the multiplication of restrictions on females tends not only to the debilitation and diminution of the race, but also to the increase of domestic murders to such an extent that a state loses more than it gains by a too prohibitive code. For whenever a temper of the woman is thus exasperated by confinement at home or hampering regulations abroad, they are apt to vent their spleen upon their husbands and children, and in less temperate climates, the whole male population of villages has been sometimes destroyed in 1 or 2 hours of spontaneous female outbreak. Hence, the 3 laws mentioned above suffice for the better regulated states, may be accepted as a rough exemplification of a female code. After all, our principal safeguard is found, not in legislature, but in the interests of the women themselves. For although they can inflict instantaneous death by retrograde movement, yet unless they can at once disengage their stinging extremity from the struggling body of their victim, their own frail bodies are liable to be shattered. So to clarify, women can destroy people with their ass. This book establishes this. The power of fashion is also on our side. I pointed out that in some less civilized states, no female is suffered to stand in a public place without swaying her back from right to left. This practice has been universally universal among ladies of any pretensions to breeding in all well-governed states, as far back as the memory of figures can reach. It is considered a disgrace to any state that legislation should have to enforce what ought to be, is in every respectable female, a natural instinct. The rhythmical and, if I may say so, well-modulated undulation of the back in our ladies of circular rank is everybody imitated by the wife of a common equilateral, which can achieve nothing beyond a mere monotonous swing, like the ticking of a pendulum. And the regular tick of the equilateral is no less admired and copied by the wife of progressive and inspiring isosceles. And the females of these families no back motion of any kind as them yet a necessity life. Hence, in every family position consideration, back motion is as prevalent as time itself, and husbands, sons, and these households enjoy immunity at least from invisible attacks. Now it must be for a moment that supposed that women are destitute of affection. But unfortunately, a passion of the moment predominates in the frail sex, or every other consideration. This is, of course, a necessity arising from unfortunate conformation, for as they have no pretensions to entangle, being inferior to this practice the very lowest of the isosceles, they are consequently wholly devoid of brain power, and have neither reflection, judgment, nor forethought, and hardly a memory. Jesus Christ. This book really was a product of its time. Anyway, hence in their fits of fury, they remember no claims and recognize no distinctions. I've actually known a case where a woman has exterminated her whole household, and a half hour afterwards, where her children and fragments swept away, has asked what has become of her husband and her children. Obviously, then, one was not to be irritated as long as she is in a position where she can turn around. When you have them in their apartments, which are constructed with a view to denying them that power, you can say and do what you like, for they are then wholly impotent for mischief, will not remember a few minutes hence this incident for which they may be at this moment threatening you with death, nor promises which you may have found it necessary to make in order to pacify their theory. On the whole, we get on pretty smoothly in our domestic relations, except in the lower strata of the military classes. There, the want of tact and discretion on the part of the husbands produces at times indescribable disasters. Relying too much on the offensive weapons of acute angles instead of the defensive organs of good sense and seasonable stimulation, these reckless creatures are too often neglect the prescribed construction of the women's apartments, or irritate their wives by ill-advised expressions out of doors, which they refuse immediately to retract. Moreover, a blunt and stolid regard for literal truth indisposes them to make those lavish promises by which a more judicious circle can in a moment pacify his consort. The result is a massacre, not, however, of its advantages, as it eliminates the more brutal and troublesome of the isosceles, and by many of our circles, the destructiveness of the thinner sex is regarded as one among many providential arrangements for suppressing redundant population and nipping revolution in the bud. Yeah, even our best and most approximately circular families, I cannot say that the ideal family life is so high as with you in Spaceland. There is no peace, insofar as the absence of slaughter may be called by that name. But there is necessarily little harmony of tastes or pursuits, and the cautious wisdom of the circles has ensured safety at the cost of domestic comfort. In every circular polygonal household it has been a habit from time immemorial, and now has become a kind of instinct among the women of our higher classes, that the mothers and daughters should constantly keep their eyes and mouths towards their husband and his male friends. And for a lady in a family of distinction to turn her back upon her husband would be regarded as a kind of portent involving loss of status. Yeah, that word's all capitalized in the book. Anyway, but as I shall soon shew, yeah, this custom, though its advantage of safety, is not without its disadvantages. In the house of the working man or respectable tradesman, where the wife is allowed to turn her back upon her husband while pursuing her household avocations, there are at least intervals of quiet, which the wife is neither seen nor heard, except for the humming sound of the continuous peace cry. While in the homes of the upper classes there is too often no peace. There the voluble mouth and penetrating eye are even directed towards the master of the household, and light itself is not more persistent than the stream of feminine discourse. Tact and skill with which suffice to avert a woman's sting are unequal to the task of stopping a woman's mouth. And as a woman has absolutely nothing to say, absolutely no constraint of wit, sense, or conscience by her from saying it, ugh, not a few cynics have been found to aver that they prefer the danger of the death-dealing but novel sting to the safe sonorousness of a woman's other end. To my readers in Spaceland, the condition of a woman may seem truly deplorable, and so indeed it is. A male of the lowest type of the isosceles may look forward to some improvement of his ankle, and the ultimate elevation of the whole of his degraded caste, but no woman can entertain such hopes for her sex. Once a woman, always a woman, is a decree of nature, and the very laws of evolution seem to spend in disfavor. Yet at least we can admire the wise prearrangement which has ordained that, as they have no hopes, so they shall have no memory to recall, no forethought to anticipate. The miseries and humiliations which are at once a necessity of resistance and the basis of constitution Flatland. When I was in Spaceland, I understood that some of your priestly circles have in the same way separate entrance for villagers, farmers, and teachers abroad schools. Spectator, September 1884, page 12. That way approach and becoming in a respectful manner. All right, we're going to take a moment here to rest our laurels and mouth. Okay, we are now approximately a fourth of the way through the book, as we are sitting on page 29, which is chapter 5, our methods of recognizing one another. Now, you may be wondering, just how the fuck do they identify themselves? Well, this chapter will tell you. Like, chapter 4 just established how you can identify women from the other shapes and beings. This definitely does smell of Victorian era. My god. Anyway, chapter 5 of our methods of recognizing one another. Let me see if that reward is actually working. It is working. Alright, perfect. Now we can guess. You, who are blessed with shade as well as light, you, who are gifted with two eyes, endowed with a knowledge of perspective, and charmed with the enjoyment of various colors, you, who can actually see an angle, and contemplate the complete circumference of a circle in the happy region of the three dimensions. How should I make clear to you the extreme difficulty which we in Flatland experience in recognizing one another's configuration? Recall what I told you above. All beings in Flatland, animate or inanimate, no matter what their form, present to our view the same, or nearly the same, appearance, viz. that of a straight line. How then can one be distinguished from another where all appear the same? The answer is threefold. The first means recognition's sense of hearing, with which with us is far more highly developed than with you, which enables us not only to distinguish by the voice of our personal friends, but even to discriminate between different classes, at least so far as concerns the three lowest orders, the equilateral, the square, and the pentagon. For of the isosceles I take into account. But as we ascend the social scale, the process of discriminating and being discriminated by hearing increases in difficulty, partially because voices are assimilated, partly because the faculty of voice discrimination is a plebeian virtue not much developed among the aristocracy, and wherever there is any danger of imposure, we cannot trust to this method. Among our lowest orders, the vocal organs are developed to a degree more than correspondent with those of hearing, so that an isosceles can easily feign the voice of a polygon, and with some training, that of a circle himself. A second method is therefore more commonly resorted to. Feeling is, among our women or lower classes, about our upper class I shall speak presently, the principal test of recognition, at all events between strangers, and when the question is not as to the individual but as to the class. What therefore introduction is among the higher classes of Spaceland, that process of feeling is with us. Permit me to ask you to feel and be felt by my friend Mr. So-and-so. It is still among the more old-fashioned of our country gentlemen in districts remote from towns, customary formula for a Flatland introduction. But in the towns and among men of business, the words "be felt by" are omitted and the sentence abbreviated to "Let me ask you to feel, Mr. So-and-so." It is assumed, although it is assumed, of course, that the feeling is to be reciprocal. Among our still more modern, dashing young gentlemen, who are extremely adverse to superfluous effort and supremely indifferent to purity of their native language, formally still further and curtailed by the use of "to feel" in a technical sense, meaning to recommend for the purpose of feeling be felt. That's all a hyphenated word. And at this moment, the slang of polite or fast society, the upper classes sanctions such a barbarism as Mr. Smith permit me to feel Mr. Jones. Let not my reader, however, suppose that feeling is with us the tedious process that would be with you, or that we find necessary to feel right round all the sides of our individual before we determine the class to which he belongs. Long practice and training, begun in the schools and continuing the experience of daily life, enables us to discriminate at once by the sense of touch between the angles of equal-sided triangle, square, and pentagon, and I need not say that the brainless vertex of an acute angle isosceles is obvious to dullest touch. Oblivious. Yeah. It is therefore not necessary as a rule to do more than feel a single angle individual, and thus once ascertained, tells the class of the person who we are addressing, unless indeed he belongs to the higher sections of the nobility. Their difficulty is much greater. Even a Master of Arts at our University of Wentbridge has been known to confuse the 10-side with a 12-side polygon. It is as there is hardly a doctor of science in or out of that famous university who could pretend to decide promptly and unhesitatingly between a 20-side and a 24-side member of the aristocracy. Those of my readers who recall the extracts given above from the legislative code concerning women, who will readily perceive that the process of reduction by contact requires some care and discretion. Otherwise, the angles might inflict on the unwary feeler irreparable injury. It is essential for safety of the feeler that the felt should stand perfectly still. A fidgety shifting of position, yes, even a violent sneeze, has been known before now to prove fatal to the incautious, and to nip in the bud many a promising friendship. Especially is the true among the lower classes of triangles. With them, the eye is situated so far from the vertex that they can scarcely take cognizance of what goes on at the extremity of their frame. They are, moreover, of a rough, coarse nature, not sensitive to the delicate touch of the highly organized polygon. What wonder, then, if an involuntary toss of the head has ere now deprived the state of a valuable life? I have heard that my excellent grandfather, one of the least irregular of the unhappy isosceles class, whom he obtained shortly before his decease, 4 out of 7 votes from the sanitary and social board from passing him into the class of the equal side, often deplored, with a tear in his venerable eye, a miscarriage of this kind. which had occurred to his great-great-great-grandfather, a respectable working man with the angle of our brain of 59 degrees 30 minutes. According to his account, that is almost a 60-degree angle, by the way, in case you're wondering. Fortunate ancestor, being afflicted with rheumatism, and the act of being felt by Paul Gamble's son start accidentally transfixed the great man through the diagonal, and thereby, partly in consequence of his long imprisonment and degradation, and partially because of the moral shock which pervaded the whole of my ancestors' relations, threw back our family a degree and a half in their ascent towards better things. The result is that in the next generation of family, the brain was registered at only 58 degrees, and not till the lapse of 5 generations was lost ground recovered, the full 60 degrees attained, and the ascent from the isosceles finally achieved. And all this series of calamities for one little accident in the process of feeling. At this point, I think I hear some of my better educated readers exclaim, how can you and Flatland know anything about angles and degrees or minutes? We can see an angle because we, in region of space, can see two straight lines inclined to one another. But you can see nothing one straight line at a time, or at all events of only a number of bits straight lines all in one straight line. How can you even discern an angle, and much less register angles of different sizes? I answer that though we cannot see angles, we can infer them, and with great precision. This with great precision. Our sense of touch, stimulated by necessity, and developed by long training, enables us to distinguish angles far more accurately than our sense of sight, when unaided by rule or measure of angles. Now must I admit to explain that we have great natural helps. It is with us the law of nature that the brain of isosceles class shall begin at half a degree, or 30 minutes, and shall increase, if it increases at all, by half a degree every generation, until the goal of 60 degrees is reached, where the condition of serfdom is quitted and the freed man enters the class of regulars. Consequently, nature herself supplies us with an ascending scale or alphabet of angles for half a degree up to 60 degrees. Specimens, which are placed in every elementary school throughout the land, owing to occasional retrogressions, to still more frequent moral and intellectual stagnation, and to the extraordinary fecundity of the criminal and vagabond classes, there is always a vast superfluity of individuals of the half-degree and single-degree class, and a fair abundance of specimens up to 10 degrees. They are absolutely destitute of civic rights, and a great number of them, not having even intelligence enough for purposes of warfare, are devoted by the states to the service of education. Fired immovably so as to remove all possibility of danger, they are placed in the classrooms of our infant schools, and there they are utilized by the Board of Education for the purpose of imparting to the offspring of the middle classes that tact and intelligence of which these wretched creatures themselves are utterly devoid. In some states, the specimens are occasionally fed and suffered to exist for several years. While in the more temperate and better regulated regions, it is found in the long run more advantageous for the educational interests of the young to dispense with food and to renew the specimens of every month, which is about the average duration of the foodless existence of the criminal class. In the cheaper schools, what is gained by the longer existence of the specimen is lost, partly in the expenditure for food, and partly in diminished accuracy of the angles, which are impaired after a few weeks of constant feeling. Nor must we forget to add, numbering the advantages of the more expensive system that attends, though slightly yet perceptibly, to the diminution of the redundant isosceles population, an object which every statesman in Flatland constantly keeps in view. On the whole, therefore, although I am not ignorant that in many populated elected school boards there is a reaction in favor of the cheap system, as it is called, I am myself disposed to think that this is one of the many cases in which the expense is the truest economy. But I must not allow questions of school board politics to divert me from my subject. Enough has been said. I trust to shew that recognition by feeling is not so tedious or indecisive a process as might have been supposed. It is obviously more trustworthy than recognition by hearing. Still there remains, as has been pointed out above, the objection that this method is not without danger. For this reason, many of the middle and lower classes, and all without exception the political and circular orders, prefer a third method, the description shall which we reserve for the next section. We're going to take a drink. God. We're now about fourth of the way through the book. I am about to appear Chapter 6 of Recognition by Sight. I am about to appear very inconsistent. In previous sections, I have said that all figures of Flatland present the appearance of a straight line. No added or implied that it is consequently impossible to distinguish by the visual organ between individuals' different classes. Yet now I am about to explain to my spaceland critics how we are able to recognize one another by sense of sight. If, however, the reader will take the trouble to refer to the passage which recognition by feeling is stated to be universal, he'll find this qualification among the lower classes. It is only among the higher classes that are temperate climates that sight recognition is practiced. That this power exists in any regions for any classes that results of fog, which prevails during the greater part of the year in all parts save the torrid zones. That which is with you in Spaceland in unmixed evil, blotting out the landscape, depressing the spirits, and enfeebling the health. The virus recognizes blessings scarcely inferior to air itself, and as the nurse of arts and the parent of sciences, allow me to explain my meaning without further eulogies on its beneficent element. If fog were not existent, all lines would appear equally and indistinguishably clear. And this is actually the case in those unhappy countries in which the atmosphere is perfectly dry and transparent. But whenever there's a rich supply of fog, objects that are at a distance, say 3 feet, are appreciably dimmer than those at a distance of 2 feet 11 inches. And the result is that by careful and constant experimentation, observation of comparative dimness and clearness, we are enabled to infer with great exactness the configuration of the object observed. I'll have a diagram to draw here soon. An instance will do more in the volume and generalities to make my meaning clear. Suppose I see two individuals approaching whose rank I wish to ascertain. They are, we'll suppose, a merchant and a physician, or in other words, an equilateral triangle and a pentagon. How am I to distinguish them? It'll be obvious to every child in Spaceland who has touched the threshold of geometrical studies that if I can bring my eye to that single glance may bisect an angle. In other words, you're looking, say this is you, looking this way. You're bisecting the angle. If I bisect the angle A of the approaching stranger, my view will lie as it were evenly between his two sides that are next to me, visible CA and AB. This is A, C, and I shall contemplate the two impartially, and both will appear of the same size. Now, in the case of the merchant, what shall I see? I shall see a straight line DAE. Like so. DAE. Which in the middle point A will be very bright because it is nearest me. So in other words, you can see this point a lot better. Actually, let me make that bright pink to indicate brightness. Now, that color doesn't actually isn't an inherent property of things here. We'll see. We'll see why that's the case in a minute. Anyway, on the other side, the line will shade away rapidly into dimness. The sides AC and AB recede rapidly into the fog. Otherwise, behind this line, it gets to be a little bit dimmer. Let's see, between here. Actually, do that. No, it's that way. Eventually, you just don't see things anymore. It fades rapidly into the fog. And in what appear to be his merchant's extremities, because C, D, and E, will be very dim indeed. On the other hand, I'm going to erase this whole thing and draw a different diagram, because assume that right side is you. Assume that I'm drawing regular polygons here, not irregular polygons, because there actually is a distinction between regular and irregular. Yeah, I'll do that. These other sides are relevant to our discussion, which is why they're not labeled. Anyway, on the other hand, in the case of 2, the position, thou shalt here also see a line DAE with a bright center A. These will have apostrophes to indicate different shapes that have different angles. They have an apostrophe on them, differentiate them from others. Yellow shade away less rapidly into dimness because the sides AC, AB recede less rapidly into the fog. So in other words, you have something like this. Or something closer to that than what I drew before. Danny will be not so dim as the extremities of the merchant. I think I can erase all this now. We're going to put Flatland back up. The reader will probably understand from these two instances how, after a very long training, coupled with a constant experience, it is possible for the well-educated classes among us to discriminate with their accuracy between the middle and lowest orders by the sense of sight. If my space land patrons have grasped this general conception, so far as to conceive the possibility of it not to reject my account as altogether incredible, I shall have attained all I can reasonably expect. Were I to attempt further details, I should only perplex. Yet for the sake of the young and inexperienced, who may perchance infer, from the two simple instances I have given above, of the manner in which I should recognize my father and my sons, so that recognition by sight is an easy affair. It may be needful to point out that in actual life most of the problems of sight recognition are far more subtle and complex. If, for example, my father, the triangle, approaches me, he happens to present his side to me instead of his angle. Then, until I have asked him to rotate, or until I have edged my eye around him, I am for the moment doubtful whether he may not be a straight line, or in other words, a woman. Again, which I am in the company of one of my two hexagonal grandsons, contemplating one of his sides AB. Alright. I'll draw that this time, because it is going to be a different angle. Nope, wrong color.
Currently live besides AB full front. It'll be evident from the company diagram that you see one whole line, AB comparative brightness, shading off hardly at all in the ends, and two smaller lines, CA and BD, dim throughout and shading away into greater dimness towards the extremities, C and D. In our words, the dimness begins around here. Ish. Give or take a little bit there. But I must not give way to the temptation of enlarging on these topics. The meanest mathematician in spaceland will rather believe me when I assert that the problems of life, which present themselves to the well-educated, when they are themselves in motion, rotating, advancing, or retreating, and at the same time, attempting to discriminate by the sense of sight between a number of polygons of high rank, moving in different discriminations. Hmm. Discriminate by the sense of sight between a number of polygons high rank, moving in different directions, and for example, in a ballroom conversation, must be of a nature to test the angularity of the most intellectual and amplify justice, the rich endowments of the learned professor's geometry, both static and kinetic, and the illustrious University of Lethbridge, where the science and art of sight recognition are regularly taught to a large class of the elite of the states. It is only a few of the scions of our noblest and wealthiest houses who are able to give the time and money necessary for the thorough prosecution of the noble and valuable art. Even to be a mathematician of no mean standing, and grandfather of the two most hopeful and perfectly regular hexagons, you find myself in the midst of a crowd of rotating polygons of the higher classes, occasionally very perplexing. And of course, to a common tradesman or serf, such a sight is almost as unintelligible as it would be to you, my reader, were you suddenly transported to our country. In such a crowd you can see on all sides of you nothing but a line, apparently straight, but which parts would vary regularly and perpetually in brightness or dimness. Even if you had completed your third year in pentagonal hexagon class of university, or perfectly in the theory of the subject, you'd still find that there was need of many years' experience before you could move in a fashionable crowd without jostling against your betters, whom it is against etiquette to ask to feel, and who, by their spirit culture and breeding, know all about your movements, while you know very little or nothing about theirs. In a word, to comport oneself with perfect propriety in polygonal society, or not to be a polygon oneself. Such as Lisa's painful teaching of my experience. It is astonishing how much the art, or I may almost call it instinct, of sight recognition is developed by the habitual practice of it and by the avoidance of the custom of feeling, just as, with you, the deaf and dumb, if once allowed to gesticulate and to use the hand alphabet, will never acquire the more difficult but far more valuable art of lip speech and lip reading. So it is with us as regards seeing and feeling. None who in early life resort to feeling will ever learn seeing in perfection. For this reason, among our higher classes, feeling is discouraged or absolutely forbidden. From the cradle, their children, instead of going to public elementary schools, which our feeling is taught, are sent to higher seminaries of an exclusive character, and at our illustrious university to feel is regarded as the most serious fault, involving rustication for the first offense and expulsion for the second. But among the lower classes, the art of sight recognition is regarded as an unattainable luxury. A common tradesman cannot afford to let his son spend a third of his life in abstract studies. The children of the poor are therefore allowed to feel from their earliest years, they gain therefore precocity and an early vivacity, which contrasts at first most favorably with the inner undeveloped and listless behavior of the half-instructed youths of the polygonal class. But when the latter have at last completed their university course and are prepared to put their theory into practice, the change that comes over them may almost be described as a new birth. In every art, science, and social pursuit, they rapidly overtake and distance their triangular competitors. Only a few of the polygonal class failed to pass the final test or leave an examination in the university. The condition of these unsuccessful minorities is truly pitiable. Rejected from the higher class, they are also despised by the lower. They have neither the matured and systematic trained powers of the polygonal bachelors and masters of arts, nor yet the native precocity and mercurial versatility of the youthful tradesman. The professions, the public services, are closest against them, and though in most states they are not actually debarred from marriage, yet they have the greatest difficulty in forming suitable alliances, as experience shows that the offspring of such unfortunate and ill-endowed parents is generally itself unfortunate, if not positively irregular. It is from these specimens of the refuse of our ability that the great tumults and additions of passages have nearly derived their leaders, and so great is the mischief thence arising that an increasing minority of our more progressive statesmen are of opinion that true mercy would dictate their entire suppression, by enacting that all who fail to pass the final examination of the university shall either be imprisoned for life or extinguished by a painless death. I find myself digressing to the subject of irregularities, a matter of such vital interest that demands a separate section. Alright, we are pretty much exactly a third of the way through the book now. Go take a drink. Chapter 7, Concerning Irregular Figures. Throughout the previous pages, I've been assuming what perhaps should have been laid down at the beginning of a distinct female proposition, that every human being in Flatland is a regular figure, that is to say, regular construction. By this I mean that a woman must not only be a line, but a straight line, that an artisan or soldier must have two of his sides equal, a tradesman must have three sides equal, lawyers, which class I am a humble member, four sides equal, and generally that in every polygon all sides must be equal. The size of the sides was of course dependent upon the age of the individual. Female at birth would be about an inch long, while a tall adult woman might extend a foot. As to the males of our class, it may be roughly said that the length of adult sides when added together is 2 feet or a little more. But the size of our sides is not under consideration. I am speaking of the quality of sides. It does not need much reflection to see that the whole of the social life of Flatland rests upon the fundamental fact that nature wills all figures to have their sides equal. If our sides were unequal, our angles might be unequal. Instead of it being sufficient to feel or estimate by sight, a single angle in order to determine the form of an individual, it would be necessary to ascertain each angle by the experiment of feeling. But life would be too short for such a tedious grouping. The whole science and art of sight recognition would at once perish. Feeling, so far as an art, would not long survive. Intercourse would become perilous or impossible. There would be an end to all confidence, all forethought. No one would be safe making the most simple social arrangements. In a word, civilization would relapse into barbarism. Yes, this is quite a work. Am I going too fast carrying my readers to these obvious conclusions? Surely a moment's reflection, in a single instance from common life, must convince every one that our whole social system is based upon regularity, or equality of angles. You meet, for example, two or three tradesmen in the street. You recognize at once to be tradesmen by a glance at their angles, rapidly bedim sides. You ask them to step into your house to lunch. This you do at present with perfect confidence, because everyone knows to an inch or two the area occupied by adult triangle, but imagine that your tradesman drags behind his regular and respectable vertex a parallelogram of 12 or 13 inches diagonal. What are you supposed to do with such a monster sticking fast in your house door? But I'm insulting the intelligence of my readers by accumulating details which must be patent to everyone who enjoys the advantages of residence in Spaceland. Spaceland being the theoretical 3 dimensions place. This thing. Over here. Anyway. Obviously, the measurements of a single angle would no longer be sufficient under such portentous circumstances. One's whole life would be taken up in feeling or surveying the perimeter of one's acquaintances. Already the difficulties of avoiding a collision in a crowd are enough to tax the sagacity of even a well-educated square. But if no one can calculate the regularity of a single figure in a company, all would be chaos and confusion, and the slightest panic would cause serious injuries or, if there happened to be any women or soldiers present, perhaps considerable loss of life. To demonstrate, Flatland has established that women are straight lines, and soldiers or tradesmen are isosceles triangles, like so. I'm drawing terribly for reasons, but yeah, you get what I mean. Because this is the theoretical two-dimension place where everything is Victorian era satire. Expediency therefore concludes with nature in stamping the seal of its approval upon regularity of confirmation. Nor has the law been backward seconding their efforts. Irregularity of figure means with us the same as, or more than, a combination of moral obliquity, and criminality with you, and is treated accordingly. There are not wanting, it is true, some promulgators of paradoxes who maintain that there is no necessary connection between geometrical and moral irregularity. The irregular, they say, is from his birth scouted by his own parents, derided by his brothers and sisters, neglected by the domestics, scorned and suspected by society, and excluded from all posts of responsibility, trust, and useful activity. His every movement is jealously watched by the police till he comes of age, presents himself for inspection. Then he is either destroyed, if he is found to exceed the fixed margin of deviation, or else immured in a government office as clerk of the 7th class, prevented from marriage, forced to drudge at an uninteresting occupation for a miserable stipend, obliged to live and board at the office, and to take even his vacation under close supervision. What wonder that human nature, even the best empirics, is embittered and perverted by such surroundings. This reminds me of Great Expectations. Anyway, all this very plausible reasoning does not convince me. This does not convince the wisest of our statesmen that our ancestors erred in laying it down as an axiom of policy that the toleration of irregularity is incompatible with the safety of the state. Doubtless, the life of the irregular is hard, but the interests of the greater number require that it shall be hard. If a man of a triangular front and a polygonal back were allowed to exist and to propagate a still more irregular posterity, what would become of the arts of life? Are the houses and doors and churches of Flatland to be altered in order to accommodate such monsters? Are ticket collectors to be required to measure every man's perimeter before they allow him to enter a theater, or take his place in a lecture room? It isn't irregular to be exempted from the militia. If not, how is he to prevent from carrying desolation to the ranks of his comrades? Again, what irresistible temptations of fraudulent impostures must needs beset such a creature? How easy for him to enter a shop with his polygonal front foremost and to order goods from any extent from a confiding tradesman. Let the advocates of a falsely called philanthropy plead as they may for the abrogation of the irregular penal laws. I, for my part, have never known an irregular who was not also what nature evidently intended him to be, a hypocrite and a misanthropist, and up to the limits of his power, a perpetrator of all manner of mischief. Not that I should be disposed to recommend, at present, the extreme measures adopted by some states, where an infant whose angle deviates by half a degree from corrected angularity is merely destroyed at birth. Yeah, they did that in Victorian England. Some of our highest and ablest men of real justice, have during their earliest days labored under deviations of great as or even greater than 45 minutes, and the loss of their precious lives would have been an irreparable injury to the state. The art of healing has achieved some of its most glorious triumphs in the compressions, extensions, trepannings, colligations, and artificial dyadic operations by which irregularity has been partly or wholly cured. Advocating, therefore, a via media, I lay down no fixture or absolute line of demarcation, but at the period at which the frame is just beginning to set, and when the medical board has reported that recovery is probable, I suggest that the irregular offspring be painlessly and mercifully consumed. Alright, so now it's starting to read like Tom Swift. Alright, that's the end of chapter 7 about the irregularity of certain people. Time to drink. Chapter 8 of the Ancient Practice of Painting. Huh. If my readers have followed me with any attention up to this point, they'll not be surprised to hear that life is somewhat dull in Flatland. I do not, of course, mean that there are not battles, conspiracies, tumults, factions, and all those other phenomena which are supposed to make history interesting. Nor would I deny that the strange mixture of the problems of life and the problems of mathematics, continually introducing conjecture and giving the opportunity of immediate verification, imparts to our existence a zest which you in Spaceland can hardly comprehend. I speak now from the aesthetic and artistic point of view when I say that life with us is dull. Aesthetically and artistically, very dull indeed. How can it be otherwise when all one's prospect, all one's landscapes, historical pieces, portraits, flowers, still life are nothing but a single line, with no varieties except degrees of brightness and obscurity? It was not always thus. Color, if tradition speaks the truth, once from the space of half a dozen centuries or more, threw a transient splendor over the lives of our ancestors in the remotest ages. Some private individual, a Pentagon whose name is variously reported, having casually discovered a constituents of the simpler colors in a rudimentary method of painting, is said to have begun decorating first his house, then his slaves, then his father, his sons and grandsons, lastly himself. The convenience as well as the beauty of the results commended themselves to all. Remember chromatists for that by by that name the most trustworthy authorities concurrent calling him. Turn his variegated frame, there he has once excited attention and attracted respect. No one now needed to feel him. No one mistook his front for his back. All his movements were readily ascertained by his neighbors without the slightest strain on the powers of calculation. No one jostled him, or failed to make way for him. His voice was saved the labor of that exhausting utterance by which we colorists, squares, and pentagons are often forced to proclaim our individuality when we move amid a crowd of ignorant isosceles. The fashion spread like wildfire. Before a week was over, every square and triangle in the district had copied the exact sample of chromatistes, and only a few of the more conservative pentagons still held out. A month or two found even the dodecagons suspected of the innovation. A year had not elapsed where the habit had spread to all but the very highest of the nobility. Needless to say, the custom soon made its way from the district of chromatists to the surrounding regions, and within 2 generations no one in all Flightland was colors except for the women and the priests. Here nature herself appeared to erect a barrier, and a plea against extending the division of these two classes. Many-sidedness was almost essential as a pretext for the innovators. Distinction of size intended by nature implied distinction of colors. Such was sophism which in those days flew from mouth to mouth, converting whole towns at a time to new culture. But manifestly to our priests and women this adage did not apply. The latter had only one side, and therefore, plurally and pedantically speaking, no sides. The former, if at least they would assert their claim to be really and truly circles, not mere high-class polygons with an infinitely large number of intimately small sides, were in the habit of boasting, what women confessed and deplored, that they also had no sides, being blessed with a perimeter of one line, or in other words, a circumference. Hence it came to pass these two classes could see no force in the so-called axiom about distinction of sides implying a distinction of color, and when all others had succumbed to the fashions of corporate decoration, the priests and the women alone still remained pure from the pollution of paint. Immoral, licentious, anarchical, unscientific, call them by what names you will, yet from an aesthetic point of view, those ancient days of the color revolt were the glorious childhood of art in Flatland. A childhood, alas, that never ripened to manhood, nor even reached the blossom of youth. To live was in itself a delight, because living implied seeing. Even at a small party, the company was a pleasure to behold. The richly varied hues of the assembly in a church or theatre are said to have more than once proved too distracting for our greatest teachers and actors. But most ravishing of all is said to have been the unspeakable magnificence of a military review. the sight of a line of battle, 20,000 isosceles suddenly facing about, and exchanging the somber black of their bases for the orange and purple of the two sides, including their acute angle. The militia of the equilateral triangle is tricolored in red, white, and blue. The mauve, ultramarine, gauche, and burnt umber of the square artillerymen, rapidly rotating near their vermilion guns. The dashing and flashing of the five-colored and six-colored pentagons and hexagons careering about the field in their offices of surgeons, geometricians, and aides de camp. All these may well have been sufficient to render credible the famous story of how an illustrious circle, overcome by artistic beauty of force under his command, threw aside his marshal's baton and his royal crown, excited that he henceforth exchanged them for the artist's pencil. How great and glorious the sensuous development of these days must have been in part indicated by the very language and vocabulary of the period. The commonest utterances of the commonest citizens in the time of the colored revolt seem to have been suffused with a richer tinge of word or thought. Into that era we are now, even now, indebted for our finest poetry and for whatever rhythm still remains to the more scientific utterance of these modern days. Hmm. Chapter 9 of the Universal Color Bill. Also, this book was written by an English teacher, English schoolmaster to be exact. So yeah, they're not far from Harry Potter. But meanwhile, the intellectual arts are fast decaying. The art of sight recognition, being no longer needed, was no longer practiced. And the studies of geometry, statics, kinetics, and other kindred subjects came soon to be considered superfluous, and fell into disrespect and neglect even at our university. The inferior art of feeling speedily experienced the same fate as our elementary schools. Then the isosceles classes, asserting that specimens were no longer used or needed, refusing to pay the customary tribute from the criminal classes to the service of education, waxed daily more numerous and more insolent on the strength of their immunity from the old brethren, which preferably exercised the twofold wholesome effect of once taming their brutal nature and thinning their excessive numbers. Year by year, the soldiers and artisans began more vehemently to assert, and with increasing truth, that there was no great difference between them and the very highest of the polygons. Not that they were raised in equality of the latter, and able to grapple with all the difficulties and solve all the problems of life, whether statical or kinetical, but a simpler principal process of color recognition. Not content with the natural neglect in which sight recognition was falling, they began boldly to demand legal prohibition of all monopolizing the aristocratic arts, and consequent abolition of all endowments for the studies of sight recognition, mathematics, and feeling. Soon they began to insist that, inasmuch as color, which was a second nature, had destroyed the need for abstract distinctions, law should fall on the same path, and that henceforth all individuals and all classes should be recognized as absolutely equal and entitled to equal rights. Finding the higher orders is wavering and undecided, the leaders of the revolution advanced still further in the requirements, and at last demanded that all classes alike, the priests and women not excepted, should do homage to color by submitting to be painted. When it was objected that priests and women had no sides, they retorted that nature and expediency concurred in dictating that the front half of every human being, that is to say, the half containing his eyes and mouth, should be distinguished from his hinder half. Then, they therefore brought about a general and extraordinary assembly of all the states of Flatland a bill proposing that every woman, the half containing the eye and the mouth should be colored red, or half green. The priests were to be painted in the same way, red being applied to the semicircle which their eye and mouth formed the middle part, while the other hinder semicircle is to be colored green. There is no little cunning in this plan, which indeed emanated not from many isosceles, for no being so great would have been the angularity enough to appreciate, much less to devise such a model of statecraft, but from an irregular circle who, instead of being destroyed in his childhood, was served by a foolish indulgence to bring desolation on his country and destruction on myriads of his followers. Hmm. On the one hand, the proposition was calculated to bring the women of all classes over to the side of chromatic innovation. For by assigning women to the same two colors that were assigned to the priests, revolutionists thereby ensured that, in certain positions, every woman would appear like a priest, and be treated with corresponding respect and deference, a prospect that could not fail to attract the female sex in a mass. But by some of my readers, possibility of the identical appearance of priest and woman under legislation may not be recognized. If so, word or two will make it obvious. Imagine a woman duly decorated, according to the new code, with the front half, i.e. the half containing the eye and mouth, red, and with the hinder half green. Look at her from the one side. Obviously, you'll see straight line, half red, half green. I will draw this demonstration for you, actually, since it is there. I will draw a shape. That's too thick. There we go. I'll also draw a line here, line here, any line about. Alright, there's a reason why I'm drawing it this way at this moment. Use pencil to do this. This is about the halfway point. I'll label this as B, that point here, this point, that point, this point is A. Now imagine a priest whose mouth is at M, and whose front semicircle AMB is consequently colored red, while his hinder semicircle is green, so that the diameter AB divides the green from the red. If you contemplate the great man so as to have your eye in the same straight line as his dividing diameter AB, what you'll see will be the straight line CBD, this thing here, of which one half will be red, the other half, one half being CB red, and BD, the other half, green. The whole line CD would be rather shorter perhaps than that of a full-size woman, will shade off more rapidly towards its extremities, but the identification of these colors give you immediate impression of identity of class, making you neglectful of other details. Bear in mind the decay of sight recognition, which threatened society at the time of the color revolt. Add to the certainty that women would speedily learn to shade off their extremities so as to taint the circles. It must then be surely obvious to you, my dear reader, that the color bill, places under great danger of confounding a priest of a young woman. How attractive this prospect must have been to the frail sex may readily be imagined. They anticipated with delight the confusion that would ensue. I will put the flatland back up, that diagram will stay for a moment. Once I get people plotting points, or if people plot points, then I will change the stuff. At home, they might hear political ecclesiastical secrets intended not for them but for their husbands and brothers. They might even issue commands in the name of a priestly circle. Out of doors, a strict combination of red and green, without addition of any other colors, would be sure to lead the common people into endless mistakes. Even the women would gain what the circles lost, in deference to the passers-by. As for the scandal that would befall the circular class if the frivolous and unseemly conduct of the women were imputed to them, and as to the consequent subversion of the Constitution, the female sex cannot be expected to give a thought to these considerations. Even in the households of circles, women were all in favor of the universal color bill. The second object aimed at by the bill was gradual demoralization of the circles themselves. In essential intellectual decay, they still preserved their pristine clearness and strength of understanding. From their earliest childhood, from those in their circular households of the total absence of color, the nobles alone preserved the sacred art of sight recognition, with all the advantages that result from that and admirable training of the intellect. Hence, up to the date of the introduction of the universal color bill, circles had not only held their own, but even increased their leisure class by absence from this popular fashion. Now, therefore, the artful irregular whom I described above as the real author's diabolical bill, determined at one blow to lower the status of the hierarchy but force them to submit to the pollution of color, and at the same time destroy their domestic opportunities of training in the art of sight recognition, so as to enfeeble their intellects by depriving them of their pure and colorless homes. Once subjected to the chromatic taint, every parental and every childish circle who would demoralize each other. Going discerning between the father and the mother would the circular infant find problems for the exercise of the understanding. Problems too often likely to be corrupted by maternal impostures with the result of shaking the child's faith in all logical conclusions. Thus, by degrees, the intellectual luster of the priestly order would wane, and the road would then lie open for total destruction of all aristocratic legislation for dispersion from our privileged classes. It is something like that. Yeah. It is a book by Edwin A. Abbott. I just reached the end of chapter 9. We're about 52 pages in. Something similar to that. Ah, chapter 10. I'm take a drink before I continue on this because I don't know. Because, yeah. Yeah, anyway, what I'm showing off here is we just got done with the section that introduced the color bill in the land of Flatland, which is a theoretical only 2D dimension place. Where this is like a viewing cone. If you're looking from like this side, you only see lines. The color bill would theoretically paint one side of somebody of a circle or a woman, circle or straight line red, the front half, which is indicated by M because that's where her mouth is, and the hind half, which is A to B but without the M, green. This line would be what you'd see from one side. But yeah, something like that. Anyway, Chapter 10 of the suppression of the chromatic sedition. The agitation for the universal color bill continued for 3 years, and up to the last moment of that period it seemed as though anarchy was destined to triumph. A whole army of polygons, who turned out to fight as private soldiers, was utterly annihilated by a superior force of isosceles triangles, the squares and pentagons meanwhile remaining neutral. Worse than all, some of the ablest circles fell prey to conjugal fury, infuriated by political animosity. The wives of many a noble household wearied their lords with prayers to give up their opposition to color bill, and some, finding their entreaties fruitless, fell on and slaughtered their innocent children and husband, perishing themselves in the act of carnage. It is recorded that during the triennial agitation, no less than 23 circles perished in domestic discord. Great, indeed, was the peril. It seemed as though the priests had no choice between submission and extermination, when suddenly the course of events was completely changed by one of those picturesque incidents which statesmen never to neglect, often to anticipate, for sometimes perhaps to originate, because of the absurdly disproportionate power with which they appeal to the sympathies of the populace. It happened that an isosceles of a low type, with a brain little if at all above 4 degrees, accidentally dabbling in the colors of some tradesman whose shop he had plundered, painted himself, or caused himself to be painted, for the story varies, with the 12 colors of a dodecagon. Going into the marketplace, he accosted in a feigned voice a maiden, the orphan daughter of the noble Pentagon, whose affection in former days he had sought in vain, and by a series of deceptions, aided on the one side by a string of lucky accidents too long to relate, and on the other by an almost inconceivable fatuity and neglect of ordinary precautions on the part of the relations of the bride. He succeeded in consummating the marriage. The unhappy girl committed suicide on discovering the fraud to which she had been subjected. When the news of this catastrophe spread from state to state, the minds of the women were violently agitated. Sympathy with the miserable victim and anticipation of similar deceptions for themselves, their sisters and their daughters, made them now regard the color bill in an entirely new aspect. Not a few openly avowed themselves converted to antagonism, The rest need only a slight stimulus to make a similar avowal. Seizing this favorable opportunity, the circles hastily convened an extraordinary assembly of estates, and besides the usual guard of convicts, they had secured the attendance of a large number of reactionary women. Amidst an unprecedented concourse, the chief circle of those days, by name Pentocyclus, arose to find himself hissed and hooted by 120,000 isosceles. But he secured silence by declaring that henceforth the circles would enter on a policy of concession. Yielding to the wishes of the majority, they would accept the color bill. The uproar began at once converted to applause. He invited Chromates, the leader of sedition, into the center of the hall, to receive in the name of his followers the submission of the hierarchy. Then followed a speech, a master of rhetoric, which occupied nearly a day in the delivery, and to which no summary can do justice. With a grave appearance of impartiality, he declared that as they were now finally committing themselves to reform and innovation, it was desirable that they should take one last view of the perimeter of the whole subject, its defects as well as its advantages, gradually introducing the mention of the dangers to the tradesmen, professional classes, and the gentlemen. He silenced the rising murmurs of the isosceles by reminding them that, in spite of all these defects, he was willing to accept the bill if it was approved by a majority. But it was manifest that all, except the isosceles, were moved by the words that were either neutral or adverse to the bill. Turning now to the workmen, he asserted that their interests must not be neglected, and that if they intended to accept the color bill, they ought to at least do so with full view of the consequences. Many of them, he said, were on the point of being admitted to the class of regular triangles. Others anticipated for their children a distinction that could not hope for themselves. That honorable ambition would now have to be sacrificed. With the universal adoption of color, all distinctions would cease. Regularity would be confused with irregularity. Development would give place to retrogression. The workman would in a few generations be degraded to the level of the military, or even the convict class. Political power would be in the hands of the greatest number, that's to say, the criminal classes, who are already more numerous than the workmen, who would soon outnumber all the other classes, but the other would the usual compensative laws of nature were violated. A subdued murmur of assent ran through the ranks of the artisans, and Chromates, in alarm, attempted to step forward and address them. But he found himself encompassed with guards and forced to remain silent while the chief circle, in a few impassioned words, made a final appeal to the women, exclaiming that, if the bill passed, no marriage would henceforth be safe, no woman's honor secure, fraud, deception, hypocrisy would pervade every household, domestic bliss would share the fate of the Constitution, and pass to speedy perdition. Sooner than this, he cried, come death. At these words, which were the preconcerted signal for action, the isosceles convicts fell on transfixed the wretched Chromates. The regular classes, opening their ranks, made way for a band of women who, under direction of the circles, moved back, foremost, invisibly and unerringly, upon the unconscious soldiers. The artisans, imitating the example of their betters, also opened their ranks. Meantime, bands of convicts occupied every entrance to the impenetrable phalanx. The battle, or rather carnage, was of short duration. Under the skillful generalship of the circles, almost every woman's charge was fatal, and very many extracted their sting uninjured, ready for a second slaughter. But no second blow was needed. The rabble isosceles did the rest of the business for themselves. Surprised, leaderless, attacked in front by invisible foes, and finding the egress cut off by the convicts behind them, they at once, after a manner, lost all presence of mind, and raised a cry of treachery. This sealed their fate. Every isosceles now saw and felt a foe in every other. In a half hour, not one of those vast multitude was living. In the fragments of 700,000 of the criminal class hanging by one another's ankles attested the triumph of order. The circles delayed not to push their victory to the utmost. The working men they spared but decimated. The militia of equilaterals was at once called out, and every triangle suspected of irregularity or reasonable grounds was destroyed by court-martial, without the formality of exact measures by the social board. The homes of the military and artisan class were inspected, in the course of visitations extending through upwards of a year. During that period, every town, village, and hamlet was systematically purged of that excess of lower orders which had been brought about by the neglect to pay the tribute of criminals to the schools and the university, and by the violation of the other natural laws constitution of Flatland. Thus the palace and class was again restored. Needless to say that henceforth the use of color was abolished, and its possession prohibited. Even the utterance of any word denoting color, except by the circles or by qualified scientific teachers, was punished by a severe penalty. Only at our university in some of the very highest and most esoteric classes, which I myself have never been privileged to attend, it is understood that the sparing use of color is still sanctioned for purpose of illustrating some of the deeper problems of mathematics. But of this I can only speak from hearsay. Elsewhere in Flatland, color is now non-existent. The art of making it is known to only one living person, Chief Circle for the time being, and by him it is handed down on his deathbed to none other but his successor. One manufactory alone produces it. Unless the secret should be betrayed, the workmen are annually consumed, and fresh ones introduced. So great is the terror with which even now aristocracy looks back to the distant days of the agitation for the universal color bill. So you hear things about eating the rich. In this one, you eat the poor. I'm gonna bust open my second drink now. Jesus Christ, my throat is getting dry. Chapter 11, Concerning Our Priest. It is high time that I should pass from these brief and discursive notes about things of Flatland to the central event of this book, my initiation to the mysteries of space. That is my subject. All that has gone before is merely preface. For this reason, I must omit many matters which the explanation would not, I flatter myself, be without interest for my readers. As for example, our method of propelling and stopping ourselves, although destitute of feet, the means by which we give fixity to structures of wood, of stone, or brick. Although of course we have no hands, nor can we lay foundations as you can see, nor avail ourselves of the lateral pressure of the earth, the matter which the rain originates in the intervals between our various zones, so that the northern ranges do not intercept the moisture from falling on the southern. The nature of our houses and mines, our trees and vegetables, our seasons and harvests, our alphabet and method of writing, adapted to our linear tablets. These and 100 other details or physical existence I must pass over, nor do I mention them now except to indicate to my readers that their omission proceeds not from forgetfulness on the part of the author, but from his regard for the time of the reader. That's a lot of history to learn. Yet before I proceed to my legitimate subject, some few final remarks will no doubt be expected by my readers upon those pillars and mainstays of the Constitution of Flatland, the controllers of our conduct, and shapers of our destiny, the objects of universal homage and almost of adoration. Need I say that I mean our circles or priests? When I call them priests, let me not be understood as meaning no more than term denotes with you. With us, our priests are administrators of all business, art, and science, writers of trade, commerce, generalship, architecture, engineering, education, statesmanship, legislature, morality, theology. Doing nothing themselves, they are the causes of everything worth doing that is done by others. Although popular everyone called a circle is deemed a circle, yet among better educated classes it is known that no circle is really a circle, but only a polygon with a very large number of very small sides. As number of sides increases, a polygon approximates to a circle, and when that number is very great indeed, say for example 3 or 400, it is extremely difficult for the most delicate touch to feel any polygonal angles. Let me say, rather, it would be difficult, for as I have shown, recognition by feeling is unknown amongst the highest society. In the feudal circle, it would be considered a most audacious insult. This habit of abstention from feeling is best society enables the circle the more easily sustain the veil of mystery which, from his earliest years, he is wont to enwrap the exact nature of his perimeter or circumference. 3 feet being the average perimeter, it follows that, in a polygon of 300 sides, each side will be no more than the 100th part of a foot in length, or a little more than a 10th part of an inch. In a polygon of 600 or 700 sides, the sides are a little larger in diameter of a spaceland pinhead. So, I'll probably delete this view now, actually. By a pin, I mean this. Anyway, enough of that. It is always assumed, by courtesy, that the chief circle for time being has 10,000 sides. The ascent of the posterity of the circles in the social scale is not restricted, as it is among the lowest regular classes by the laws of nature, which limits the increase of sides to one each generation. If it were so, the number of sides of a circle would be a mere question of pedigree and arithmetic, and the 497th descent of an equilateral triangle would necessarily be a polygon of 500 sides. But this is not the case. Nature's law prescribes two antagonistic decrees affecting circular propagation. First, that as the race climbs higher into the scale of development, so development shall proceed at an accelerated pace. Second, that in the same proportion, the race shall become less fertile. Consequently, in the home of a polygon of 4 or 500 sides, it is rare to find a son. More than one is never seen. On the other hand, the son of a 500-side polygon has been known to possess 550 or even 600 sides. Art also steps in to help the process of the higher evolution. Our physicians have discovered that the small and tender sides of an infant polygon of the higher class can be fractured, and his whole frame reset with such exactness that a polygon of 200 or 300 sides, sometimes by no means always, for a process is attended with serious risk, sometimes overleaps 200 or 300 generations, and as it were doubles at a stroke the number of progenitors and numberability of his descent. Many a promising child is sacrificed in this way. Scarcely 1 out of 10 survives. Yet so strong is the parental ambition among these polygons, who are, as it were, on the fringe of the circular class, that it is very rare to find a nobleman of that position in society who has elected to place his firstborn in the circular neotherapeutic gymnasium before he has attained the age of a month. 1 year determines success or failure. At the end of that time, the child has, in all probability, added one more to the tombstones that crowd the neotherapeutic cemetery. On rare occasions, a glad procession bears back the little one to exultant parents. No longer a polygon, but a circle, at least by courtesy. And a single instance of so blessed a result induces multitudes of polygonal parents to submit to similar domestic sacrifices, which have been a dissimilar issue. Alright, you get a drink. We are halfway through the book. Chapter 12 of the Doctrine of Our Priest. As to the doctrine of the circles, it may briefly be summed up in a singular maxim: attend to your configuration. Whether political, ecclesiastical, or moral, all their teaching has for its object the improvement of the individual and collective configuration, with special reference, of course, in the configuration of the circles, to which all other objects are subordinated. Oh, that was fucking bitrate. Weird. It is the merit of the circles that they have effectually suppressed those ancient heresies which led men to waste energy, sympathy, and the feigned belief that conduct depends upon will, effort, training, encouragement, praise, or anything else but configuration. Those pentacyclists, the illustrious circle mentioned above, as the queller of the color revolt, who first convinced mankind that configuration makes the man, that if, for example, you are born an isosceles of two uneven sides, you will assuredly go wrong unless you have made them even. First purpose must go to the isosceles hospital. Similarly, if you're a triangle or square, or even a polygon, born of any irregularity, you must be taken out to one of the irregular hospitals to have your disease cured. Otherwise, you'll end your days in state prison or by the angle of the state executioner. All faults are defects, from the slightest misconduct to the most flagitious crime. Pentacyclists attributed to some deviation from perfect regularity in the bodily figure, caused perhaps, if not congenital, by some collision in the crowd, by neglect to take exercise, by taking too much of it, or even by its unchanged temperature, resulting in a shrinkage or expansion to some too successful part of the frame. Therefore, conclude that illustrious philosopher, neither good conduct nor bad conduct is a fit subject, in any sober estimation, for either praise or blame. For why should you praise, for example, the integrity of a square who faithfully defends the interests of his client, when you ought to, in reality, rather to admire the exact precision of his right angles? Or again, why blame a lying, thieving isosceles when you ought rather to deplore the incurable inequality of his sides? So in other words, he's preaching that you look at somebody and you know what they're about. You judge people by looking at them. Theoretically, this doctrine is unquestionable, but it has practical drawbacks. In dealing with an isosceles, if a rascal pleads that he cannot help stealing because of his unevenness, you reply for that very reason, because he cannot help being a nuisance to his neighbors, you, the magistrate, cannot help sentencing him to be consumed. And there's an end of the matter. But in little domestic disputes, where the penalty of consumption or death is out of the question, this theory of configuration sometimes comes in awkwardly. I must confess that occasionally one of my own hexagonal grandsons pleads as an excuse for his disabilities that the unchanged temperature has been too much for his perimeter, that I ought to lay the blame not on him but his configuration, which can only be strengthened by abundance of the choicest sweetmeats. I see my way logically to reject nor practically to accept his conclusions. For my own part, I find it best to assume that a good sound scolding castigation has some latent strengthening influence on my grandson's configuration, though I own that I have no grounds for thinking so. At all events, I am not alone in my way of extricating myself from this dilemma, for I find that many of the highest circles, sitting as judges in law courts, use praise and blame towards regular and irregular figures. And in their homes, I know by experience that, when scolding their children, they speak about right or wrong as vehemently as passionately as they believe that these names represent real existences and that human figure is really capable of choosing between them. Constantly carrying out the policy of making configuration the leading idea in every mind, circles reverse the nature of the commandment which Spaceland regulates the relations between parents and children. With you, children are taught to honor the parents with us, next to the circles, who are the chief objects of universal homage. A man is taught to honor his grandson, if he has one, or, if not, his son. By honor, however, is by no means indulgence, but a reverent regard for the highest interest. And the circles teach that the duty of fathers is to subordinate their own interests to those of posterity, thereby advancing the welfare of the whole state as well as that of their own immediate descendants. The weak point in the system of the circles, if a humble square may venture to speak of anything circular as containing any element of weakness, appears to me to be found in their relations with women. As of the utmost importance for society that irregular births should be discouraged, it follows that no woman who has any irregularities in her ancestry is a fit partner for one who desires his posterity should rise by irregularities in his own stale. Now, the irregularity of a male is a matter of measurement, but as all women are straight, and therefore visibly regular, so to speak, one has to devise some other means as training what I may call their invisible irregularity. That is to say, their potential irregularities as regards possible offspring. This is effected by carefully kept pedigrees, which are preserved and supervised by the state. Without a certified pedigree, no woman is allowed to marry. Now, it might have been supposed that a circle, rather than ancestry and regardful for posterity, which might possibly issue thereafter in a chief circle, would be more careful than the other to choose a wife who had no plot on her execution. But it is not so. The care in choosing a regular life appears to diminish as one rises in the social scale. Nothing would indulge inspiring isosceles, who had hopes of generating a collateral son, to take a wife who reckoned a single irregularity among her ancestors, a square or pentagon, who is confident that his family is steadily on the rise, does not require above the 500th generation. A hexagon or decagon is even more careless of the wife's pedigree. Thus, Circle has been known deliberately to take a wife who has had an irregular great-grandfather, all because of some slightly superiority of lustre, or because of the charms of a low voice, which with us, even more new, is thought an excellent thing in a woman. Such ill-judged marriages are, as might be expected, barren, if they do not result in positive hilarity or diminution of sides, but none of these evils have hitherto proved sufficiently deterrent. But also a few sides, and a highly developed polygon is not easily noticed, and is sometimes compensated by a successful operation of neo-therapeutic gymnasium, as I described above, and the circles are too much disposed to acquiesce in infecundity, as a law of the superior development. Yet this evil can be not arrested. The gradual diminution of the circular class may soon become more rapid, and the time may not be far distant when, the race being no longer able to produce a chief circle, the constitutional flatland must fall. One other word of warning suggests itself to me, though, that I cannot so easily mention a remedy. This also refers to our relations with women. About 300 years ago, it was decreed by the chief circle that, since women are deficient in reason but emotion, they ought no longer be treated as rational nor receive any mental education. Yep, this is Victorian England, kids. The consequence was that they are no longer taught to read, or even the master arithmetic enough to enable them to count the angles of their husband or children, and hence they sensibly declined during each generation in intellectual power. This system of female non-education or quietism still prevails. My fear is that, with best intentions, this policy has been carried so far as to react injuriously on the male sex. For a consequence is that, as things are now, we males have to lead in a kind of bilingual, and I may almost say bimental existence. With only speak of love, duty, right, wrong, pity, hope, and other rational emotional conceptions, which have no existence, and the fiction of which has no object except to control feminine exuberances. But among ourselves in our books we have an entirely different vocabulary, and I will say idiom. Love becomes the anticipation of benefits, duty becomes necessity or fitness, and other words correspondingly transmuted. Moreover, among women, we use language implying the utmost deference for the sex. They fully believe that Chief Circle himself is not more devoutly adored by us than they are, but behind their backs they are both regarded and spoken of, by all except the very young, as being little better than mindless organisms. Our theology also in the women's chambers is entirely different from our theology elsewhere. Now, my humble fear is that this double training, in language as well as in thought, imposes somewhat too heavily a burden upon the young, especially when at the age of 3 years old they are taken from the maternal care and taught to unlearn the old language, except for the purpose of repeating it in the presence of their mothers and nurses, and to learn vocabulary of idiom science. Already methinks I discern a weakness in the grasp of mathematical truth at the present time, as compared with the more abundant, robust intellect of our ancestors 300 years ago. I say nothing of the possible danger if a woman should ever surreptitiously learn to read and convey to her sex the result of her perusal of a single popular volume, nor of the possibility that the indiscretion of disobeying some infant male might reveal to a mother the secrets of her logical dialect. On the simple ground of the enfeebling of the male intellect, I rest this humble appeal to the highest authorities to reconsider regulations of female education. That's the end of part 1 of the book. Part 2 is Other Worlds, which has the tagline, "Oh brave new worlds that have such people in them." It is okay. Hmm, we can discuss other dimensions now. This is cool. Chapter 13. How I Had a Vision of Lineland. It was the last day, but one of the nine of the 1999th year of our era, the first day of the long vacation. Having amused myself till a late hour with my favorite recreation of geometry, I retired to rest with an unsolved problem in my mind. The night I had a dream. I saw before me a vast multitude of small straight lines, which I naturally assumed to be women, interspersed with other beings still smaller and of the nature of lustrous points, all moving to and fro in one and the same straight line, and as nearby I could judge with the same velocity. A noise of confused multitudinous chirping or twittering issued from them at intervals as long as they were moving, but sometimes they ceased for motion, and then all was silence. Approaching one of the largest voices thought to be a woman, I accosted her, but received no answer. A second and a third appeal on my part was equally ineffectual. Losing patience with what appeared to me intolerable rudeness, I brought my mouth into position to hold the front of her mouth to intercept her motion, and allowed her to repeat my question. Woman, what signifies this concourse and this strange confused chirping, this monotonous motion to and fro in one and the same straight line? I am no woman, replied the small line. I am the monarch of the world. Why thou, whence intrudest thou into my realm of Lineland? Receiving this abrupt reply, I begged pardon if I had in any way startled or molested his royal highness, and described myself as a stranger that I besought the king to give me some account of his dominions. But I had the greatest possible difficulty in obtaining information on points that really interested me, For the monarch could not refrain from constantly assuming that whatever was familiar to him must also be known to me, that I was simulating ignorance in jest. However, by persevering questions, I elicited the following facts. It seemed that this poor ignorant monarch, as he called himself, was persuaded that the straight line which he called his kingdom, into which he passed existence, constituted the whole of his world, and indeed the whole of space. Not being either to move or to see, save in a straight line, he had no conception of anything out of it. So, all you see in Lineland is point, point. Imagine this is you. You are a line. You see point. Though he had heard my voice when I first addressed him, the sounds had come to him in a manner so contrary to his experience that he made no answer, saying "no man" as he expressed it, and hearing a voice as it were from my own intestines. Until the moment when I placed my mouth in his world, he had neither seen me nor heard anything except confused sounds beating against what I called his side, what he called his inside or stomach. Nor had he ever now the least conception of the region from which I came. Outside his world, or line, all was blank to him. Maybe not even a blank, for a blank implies space, say rather all was non-existent. His subjects, of whom the small lines were men and the points were women, were all alike confined in motion and eyesight that single straight line, which was their world. It need scarcely be added that the whole of the horizon was limited to a point, nor could anyone ever see anything but a point. Man, woman, child, thing, each was a point to the eye of a Linelander. Only by the sound of the voice could sex or age be distinguished. Moreover, as each individual occupied the whole of the narrow path, so to speak, which constituted his universe, so no one could move to the right or left to make way for passers-by. It followed that no Linelander could ever pass another. Once neighbors, always neighbors. Neighborhood with them was like marriage with us. Neighbors remained neighbors till death did them part. Such a life, with all vision limited to a point, and all motion to a straight line, seemed to be inexpressibly dreary, and I was surprised to note the vivacity and cheerfulness of the king. Wondering whether it was possible, amid circumstances so unfavorable to domestic relations, to enjoy the pleasures of conjugal union, I hesitated for some time to question his Royal Highness on so delicate a subject, but alas, I plunged into it by abruptly inquiring as to the health of his family. My wife and children, he replied, are well and happy. Staggered at this answer, for in immediate proximity of the monarch, as I had known in my dream before I entered Lineland, there are none but men, I ventured to reply. Pardon me, but I cannot imagine how your Royal Highness can at any time either see or approach your Majesties, when there are at least half a dozen intervening individuals who you can neither see through nor pass by. Is it possible in Lineland proximity is not necessary for marriage and for generation of children? How can you ask so absurd a question? Replied the monarch. If it were indeed as you suggest, the universe would soon be depopulated. No, no. Neighborhood is needless for the union of hearts, and the birth of children is too important a matter to have been allowed to depend upon such an accident as proximity. You cannot be ignorant of this. Yet since you are pleased to affect ignorance, I'll instruct you as you were the veriest baby in Lineland. Know, then, that marriages are consummated by means of the faculty of sound and the sense of hearing. You are, of course, that every man has two mouths or voices, as well as two eyes, a bass at one and a tenor at the other of his extremities. I should not mention this, but have I have been unable to distinguish your tenor in the course of our conversation. I replied that I had but one voice, that I had not been aware that it was Royal Highness had two. That confirms my impression, said the king, that you are not a man, but a feminine monstrosity with a bass voice and early uneducated ears. But to continue. Nature, having herself ordained that every man and woman should wed two wives. Why two? Asked I. You carry your affected simplicity too far, he cried. How can be a completely harmonious union without the combination of the four in one? The bass and tenor of the man, and the soprano contralto of the two women. But supposing, said I, that a man should prefer one wife or three. It is impossible, he said. It is as inconceivable as the 2 in 1 should make 5, that the human eye should see a straight line. Would have interrupted him, but he proceeded as follows. Once in the middle of each week, a law of nature compels us to move to and fro with a rhythmic motion of more than the usual violence, which continues for the time you would take to count 101. In the midst of this choral dance, its 51st pulsation, the inhabitants of the universe pause in full career. Each individual sends forth his richest, fullest, sweetest strain. It is in this decisive moment that all of our marriages are made. So exquisite in the adaptation of bass to treble, of tenor to contralto, that oftentimes the loved ones, though 20,000 leagues away, recognize at once the responsive note of their destined lover, and penetrating the paltry obstacles of distance, love unites the three. The marriage in that instance consummated results in a threefold male and female offspring, which takes place in Lineland. What? Always threefold, said I. Must one wife then always have twins? I said the voice monstrosity. Yes, replied the king. How else could the balance of the sexes be maintained if 2 girls were not born for every boy? Would you ignore the very alphabet of nature? He ceased, speechless for fury, and some time elapsed before I could induce him to resume his narrative. You'll not, of course, suppose every bachelor among us finds his mates as first wooing in universal marriage chorus. On the contrary, the process by most of us many times repeated. Few are the hearts whose happy lot is at once to recognize in each other's voice as the partner intended for them by Providence, and reply to a reciprocal and perfectly harmonious embrace. Ah, with most of us, courtship is of long duration. The wooer's voices may perhaps accord with one of the future wives, but not with both, or not, at first, with either, or the soprano or contralto may not quite harmonize. In some cases, nature has provided that every weekly chorus shall bring the 3 lovers into closer harmony. Each tralo voice, each freshly discovery of discord, almost imperceptibly induces less perfect to modify his or her vocal utterances as to approximate the more perfect. After many trials and many approximations, the result is at last achieved. There comes a day, at last, when, while the wonted marriage chorus goes forth from the universal Lineland, the 3 far-off lovers suddenly find themselves in exact harmony, and before they are awake, the wedding triplet is wrapped vocally into a duplicate embrace, and nature rejoices over 1 more marriage and over 3 more births. Alright, that's chapter 13. I am at this point a little bit beyond about beyond halfway through the book and closing in on 2/3 of the way. Chapter 14. How I vainly tried to explain the nature of Flatland. Though it was time to bring down the monarch from his raptures to the level of common sense, I determined to endeavor him to open up to him some glimpse of the truth. That is to say, the nature of things in Flatland. So I began thus. How does your Royal Highness distinguish the shapes and positions of his subjects? I, for my part, roused by the sense of sight, before I enter your kingdom, that some of your people are lines and other points, and that some of the lines are larger. You speak of an impossibility, interrupted the king. You must have seen a vision, for a detect between a line and a point by the sense of sight is, everyone knows, nature of things is impossible. But it can be detected by the sense of hearing. And by the same means, my shape can be exactly ascertained. Behold me. I am a line. The longest in Lineland. Over 6 inches of space. Of length, I ventured to suggest. Fool, he said, space is length. Interrupt me again, I have done. I apologize, but he continued scornfully. Since you're impervious to argument, shall hear of your ears how by all means by 2 voices I reveal my shape to my wives. For all this moment 6,000 miles, 70 yards, 2 feet, 8 inches away. The one to the north, the other to the south. Listen, I called to them. He chirruped, and then complacently continued. My wives, at this moment, receiving the sound of one of my voices, closely followed by the other, perceiving that the latter reaches them after an interval which sound can traverse 6.457 inches. Infer that one of my mouths is 6.457 inches further from them than the other, and accordingly know my shape to be 6.457 inches. But you will, of course, understand my wives do not make this calculation every time they hear my two voices. They made it once for all before we were married. But they could make it at any time. In the same way I estimate the shape of many of my male subjects is by the sense of sound. But how I, said I. A man feigns one's voice if one of his two voices, or such as his southern voice that cannot be recognized as the echo of the northern. May not such suggestions cause great inconvenience? Have you no means of checking frauds of this kind by commanding your neighboring subjects to feel one another? This, of course, was a very stupid question, for feeling could not have answered the purpose, but as to the view of irritating the monarch, I succeeded perfectly. What? Cried he in horror. Explain your meaning. Feel, touch, come into contact, I replied. Even by feeling, said the king, approaching so closely as to leave no space between two individuals, know, stranger, that this offence is punishable by my dominions by death. And the reason is obvious. The frail form of a woman, being liable to be shattered by such an approximation, must be preserved by the state. But since women cannot be distinguished by the sense of sight from men, the law ordains universally neither man nor woman shall be approached so closely as to destroy the interval between the approximator and the approximated. And indeed, what possible purpose would be served by this illogical, illegal, and unnatural excess approximation which is called touching, when all the ends of the so brutal as of course process are attained at once more easily and more affected by a sense of hearing? As your suggested danger of deception, it is non-existent, for the voice, being the essence of one's being, cannot be thus changed at will. But come, suppose I had the power of passing through solid things, I could penetrate my subjects, one after another, even to the number of a billion, verifying the size distance of each by the sense of feeling. How much time and energy would be wasted in this clumsy and inaccurate method? Whereas now, one more moment of audition, I take as it were the census and statistics, local, corporeal, mental, and spiritual, of every living being in Lineland. Hark! Only hark! So say he paused and listened, as if in an ecstasy, to the sound which seemed to be no better than tiny chirping from innumerable multitude of Lilliputian grasshoppers. Truly, replied I, your sense of hearing serves you in good stead. It fills up many of your deficiencies. But permit me to point out that your life in land must be deplorably dull. See nothing but a point. Not even to be able to contemplate a straight line. Nay, not even to know what a straight line is. To see, yet be cut off from those linear prospects which are vouchsafed to us in Flatland. Better, surely, to have no sense of sight at all than to see so little. I grant you I have not your discriminative faculty of hearing, for a concert of all, Lineland, which gives you much intense pleasure, is to me no better than multitudinous twittering or chirping. But at least I can discern by sight a line from a point. Let me prove it. Just before I came to your kingdom, I saw you dancing from left to right, then from right to left, with seven men and a woman to your immediate proximity on the left, and 8 women and 2 women on your right. Is this not correct? It's correct. It is correct, said the king, so far as numbers and sexes are concerned, though I know not what you mean by right and left. But I deny that you saw these things. For how could you see the line, that is to say, the inside of any man? But you must have heard these things, and then dreamed that you saw them. Please ask what you mean by those words left and right. I suppose it is your way of saying northward and southward? Not so, replied I. Besides your notion of northward and southward, there is another motion, which I call from right to left. Now they have this set up in a play manner. King, exhibit to me, if you please, this motion from left to right. I. Nay, that I cannot do, unless you can step out of your line altogether. Out of my line? Do you mean out of this world? Out of space? Yeah, why? Well, yes, out of your world, out of your space, for your space is not the true space. True space is a plane, but your space is only a line. King, if you cannot indicate this motion from left to right by yourself moving it, then I beg of you to describe it to me in words. I, if you cannot tell your right side from your left, I fear that no words of mine can make my meaning clear to you. But surely you cannot be ignorant of so simple a distinction. King, I do not the least understand you. I, alas, how shall I make it clear? When you move straight on, does it not sometimes occur to you that you could move in some other way, turning your eye round as to look in your direction towards which your side is now fronting? Our words, instead of always moving in the direction of one of your extremities, do you never feel a desire to move in the direction, so to speak, of your side? King, never. What do you mean? How can a man's inside front in a direction? Or how can a man move in any direction of his inside? Aye. Well, since those words cannot explain the matter, I'll try deeds. Move gradually out of line in direction which I have desired to indicate to you. At the word, I began to move my body out of line land, so as long as any part of me remained in his dominion and in his view. The King kept exclaiming, I see you still, you're not moving. But when I had at least moved out myself out of his line, he cried in his shrillest voice, She is vanished! She is dead! I'm not dead, replied I. I'm simply out of line land, that is to say, out of the straight line which you call space. And in true space, where I can see as things are. And at this moment I can see your line aside, or inside as you please to call it. I can see also men and women on north south of you. Who I'll now enumerate, describing the order, the size, and the interval between each. When I had done this at great length, I cried triumphantly, Does that at last convince you? And with that, I once more entered line land, taking up the same position as before. But the monarch replied, If you are a man of sense, though, as you appear to have only one voice, I have little doubt you are not a man, but a woman. But if you had a particle of sense, you would listen to reason. You asked me to believe that there was another line besides that which my sense indicate, or emotion besides that of which I am daily conscious. I returned, as you describing the words that indicate by motion that other line of which you speak. Instead of moving, he merely exercised some magic art of vanishing and returning out of sight. Instead of any lucid description of a new world, he simply told me numbers and sizes of some 40 of my retinue, facts known to any child in my capital. Can anything more irrational or audacious? I acknowledge your folly to depart from my dominion. Furious at his perversity, especially indignant that he professed to be ignorant of my sex. I retorted in no measured terms. Besotted being! You think yourself perfection of existence, while you're in reality the most imperfect and imbecile. You profess to see, whereas you can see nothing but a point. You plume yourself in inferring the existence of a straight line, but I can see straight lines, in the very existence of angles, triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, and even circles. Why waste more words? Suffice it that I am the completion of your incomplete self. You're a line, but I am a line of lines. Call in my country a square. Even I, infinitely superior though I am to you, am of little account to among the great nobles of Flatland, whence I have come to visit you in the hope of lightening your ignorance. Hearing these words, the king advanced towards me with a menacing cry as if to pierce me through the diagonal. And that in that same moment there rose from myriads of subjects multitudinous war cry, piercing vehemence till last methought it rivaled the roar of an army of 100,000 isosceles, and the artillery of 1,000 pentagons. Spellbound, motionless, I could neither speak nor move to avert the impending destruction. Still the noise grew louder, and the king came closer, when I woke to find the breakfast bell recalling me into the realities of Flatland. Alright, now we are two-thirds of the way through the book. Time to drink. Chapter 15. Concerning a stranger from Spaceland. From dreams I perceived the facts. It was the last day of the 1990 year of our era. The pattering of the rain had long ago announced nightfall, thus sitting in the company of my wife. Musing on the events of the past and prospects of the coming year, coming century, the coming millennium. My nose was doing funny things. My four sons and two orphan grandchildren had retired to their several apartments. My wife alone remained with me to see the old millennium out and into the new one in. I was wrapped in thought, pondering in my mind some words that had casually issued from the mouth of my youngest grandson, most promising young hexagon of unusual brilliancy and perfect angularity. His uncles and I had been giving him his usual practical lesson in sight recognition, turning ourselves upon our centers, now rapidly, now more slowly, and I know so questioning him as to our positions. His answers had been so satisfactory that I have been introduced toward him by giving him a few hints of arithmetic as applied to geometry. Taking 9 squares, each an inch every way, I had put them together to make one large square, beside 3 inches, and I had hence proved my grandson that though it was impossible for us to see the inside of the square, yet we might ascertain the number of square inches in a square by simply squaring the number of inches inside. And thus, said I, we know that 3 squared, or 9, represents the number of square inches in a square whose side is 3 inches long. The little hexagon mediated on this a while and said to me, "Well, you've been teaching me to raise numbers to the third power." I suppose 3 to the power of 3 must mean something in geometry. What does it mean? Nothing at all, replied I. Not at least in geometry, for geometry has only 2 dimensions. Then I began to shew the boy how a point by moving through the length 3 inches made a line of 3 inches, which may be represented by 3, and how a line of 3 inches, moving parallel to itself through a length of 3 inches, makes a square of 3 inches every way, which may be represented by 3 squared. Hmm. Upon this, my grandson, again returning to his former suggestion, took me up rather suddenly and exclaimed, "Well then, if a point by moving 3 inches makes a line of 3 inches represented by 3, if a straight line of 3 inches moving parallel to itself makes a square of 3 inches every way represented by 3 squared, it must mean that a square 3 inches every way, moving somehow parallel to itself, but I don't know how, see how, must make something else. I don't see what. 3 inches every way. This must be represented by 3 by 3. Go to bed, said I, ruffled by the interruption. If you would talk less nonsense, you remember more sense. So my grandson had disappeared in disgrace, and there I sat by my wife's side, endeavoring to form a retrospect of the year 1999, that was suggested by the prattle of my bright little hexagon. Only a few sands now remained in the half-hour glass. Rousing myself from my reverie, I turned the glass northward for the last time in old millennium, yet I exclaimed aloud, "This boy is a fool." Strange straightway began conscious of a presence in the room. Chilling breath thrilled my through my very being. "He is no such thing," cried my wife. "You are breaking the commands and thus dishonoring your grandson." I took notice of her. Looking around in every direction, I could see nothing, yet I still felt a presence, and shivered as the cold whisper came again. I started up. "What's the matter?" said my wife. "There's no drought. What are you looking for? There's nothing. There was nothing." I resumed my seat, again exclaiming, "The boy's a fool," I said. "Just 3 to the power 3 can have no meaning in geometry." Once there came a distinctly audible reply. "The boy is not a fool. In 3 to the power 3 has an obvious geometrical meaning." My wife as well as myself heard the words, although she did not understand their meaning, and both of us sprang forward in the direction of the sound. What was the horror when we saw before us a figure? At first glance it appeared to be a woman, seen sideways, but a moment's observation shewed me that the extremities passed into dimness too rapidly to represent one of the female sex. I should have thought it was a circle, Only that seemed to change size in a manner impossible for a circle or for any regular figure of which I had experience. But my wife had not my experience, nor the coolest necessary to note these characteristics. With the usual hastiness and unreasoning jealousy of her sex, she flew at once to the conclusion that a woman had entered the house through some small aperture. "How comes this person here?" she exclaimed. "You promised me, my dear, there should be no ventilators in the new house." "Nor are there any," said I. "But what makes you think the stranger a woman? I see no power of sight recognition." "Oh, I have no patience for sight recognition," replied she. "Feeling is believing, and a straight line to the touch is worth a circle in sight." Two proverbs very common with the frailer sex in Flatland. "Well," said I, for I was afraid of returning here, "if it must be so, demand an introduction." Assuming her most gracious manner, my wife advanced toward the stranger. "Permit me, madam, to feel and be felt by—" and suddenly recalling, "Oh, it is not a woman, and there are no angles either, nor not a trace of one. Can it be that I have so misbehaved to a perfect circle?" "I am indeed, in a certain sense, a circle," replied the voice, "and a more perfect circle than any in Flatland. But to speak more accurately, I am many circles in one." They added more mildly, "I have a message, dear madam, to your husband, which I am not must not deliver in your presence, and if you would suffer us to retire for a few minutes." But my wife would not listen to the proposal that her august visitor should so incommodate himself. And assuring the circle had the honor of her own retirement had long passed. With many reiterated apologies for recent indiscretion, she at last returned to her apartment. I glanced at the half-hour glass. The last sands had fallen. The third millennium had begun. Now to note what they mean by one. When I say sitting, of course I do not mean any change of altitude, especially in space lines signified by that word. For as we have no feet, we can no more sit nor stand, in your sense of the word, than one of your soul's flounders. Nevertheless, we perfectly well recognize different mental states of volition implying lying, sitting, and standing, which are to some extent indicated to a beholder by a slight increase of luster corresponding to an increase of volition. But on this and a thousand other kindred subjects, time forbids me to dwell. How the stranger vainly endeavored to reveal to me, in words, the mysteries of Spaceland. As soon as the peace cry of my departing wife had died away, I began to approach the stranger with the intention of taking a near view and of bidding him be seated. But his appearance struck me dumb and motionless with astoundment. Without the slightest symptoms of angularity, he nevertheless varied every instant of graduations of size and brightness scarcely possible to any figure within the scope of my existence. The thought flashed across me that I might have before me a burglar or cutthroat, some monstrous irregular isosceles, who, by feigning the voice of a circle, had obtained admission somehow into the house, was now preparing to stab me with his acute angle. In a sitting room, the absence of fog, and the season happened to be remarkably dry, made it difficult for me to trust sight recognition, especially the short distance at which I was standing. Despite with fear, I rushed forward unceremonious. "You must permit me, sir," to tell him. My wife was right. There is not the trace of an angle, nor the slightest roughness or inequality. Never in my life I had met with a more perfect circle. He remained motionless while I walked round him, getting from his eye and returning to it again. Circle here was throughout, a purely satisfactory circle. There could not be a doubt of it. Then followed by dialogue, which I'll endeavor to set down. Oh, we're in chapter 16 now. How the stranger vainly endeavored to reveal me the words of Mysteries of Spaceland. Anyway, then followed dialogue, which I will endeavor to set down as near as I can recollect it, putting only some of my profuse apologies, for I was covered with shame and humiliation that I, a square, should have been guilty of the impertinence of feeling a circle. It was commenced by the stranger of some impatience at the lengthiness of my introductory process. Stranger. "Have you felt me enough by this time? Are you not introduced to me yet?" "Most illustrious sir, excuse my awkwardness, which arises not from ignorance of the usages of polite society, but from a little surprise and nervousness consequent on a somewhat unexpected visit, and I beseech you to reveal my instructions to no one, especially not to my wife. But before your lordship enters into future communications, would he deign to satisfy the curiosity of one who would gladly know where his visitor came?" "From space. From space. Sir, where else?" "Pardon me, my lord, but is not your lordship already in space? Your lordship and his humble servant, even at this moment?" "Pooh! What do you know of space? Define space. Aye, space, my lord, is height and breadth indefinitely prolonged. Exactly. You see, you do not even know what space is. You think it is of two dimensions only. I have come to announce to you a third. Height, breadth, length. Your lordship is pleased to be merry. I'll speak of length and height, or breadth and thickness, just knowing two dimensions of four names. I mean not only three names, but three dimensions. Aye, would your lordship indicate or explain to me what direction is third dimension unbeknownst to me? I came from it. It is up above and down below it. Hmm, my lord. Aye, my lord means seemingly that it is northward and southward. Stranger, I mean nothing of the kind. I mean a direction of which you cannot look, because if you have no eye on your side. Aye, pardon me, my lord. Most inspection convinced your lordship that I have a perfect luminary juncture to my sides. Hmm. One. Pardon me, lord. My most inspection convinced your lordship that I have a perfect luminary juncture to my sides. Stranger, yes, but in order to see into space, you ought to have an eye not on your perimeter, but on your side. That is on what you would probably call your inside. But we in space should call it your side. One. Eye. An eye in my inside, an eye in my stomach. Your lordship jests. Stranger, I am no jesting humor. I tell you that I come from space, or since you'll not understand what space means, from your land of three dimensions, where I but lately looked down upon your plane, which you call space forsooth. From that position of advantage I discerned that all that you would speak of as solid, by which you mean enclosed on four sides, your houses, your churches, your very chests and safe. Yes, even your insides and stomachs, all lying open, exposed to my view. Such assertions are easily made, my lord. Stranger, but not easily proved, you mean? I mean to prove mine. When I descended here, I saw your four sons, the pentagons, each in his apartment, and your two grandsons, the hexagons. I saw your youngest hexagon remain a while with you and retire to his room, leaving you and your wife alone. I saw your isosceles servants, three in number, the kitchen at supper, a little page in the scullery. I came here. How do you think I came? One, through the roof, I suppose. Not so. Your roof, as you know very well, has been recently repaired, and has no aperture by which even a woman could penetrate. I tell you, I came from space. Are you not convinced by what I have told you of your children and household? Your lordship must be aware that such facts touching the belonging of his humble servant might be easily ascertained by any one in the neighborhood possessing your lordship's ample means of obtaining information. Turn to himself. What must I do? State. Stay, one more argument suggests itself to me. You see a straight line in your life, for example. How many dimensions do you attribute her? One. Your lordship would treat me as if I were one of the vulgar who, be it her mathematics, suppose that a woman is really a straight line in only one dimension. No, no, my lord. We squares are better advised, as are as well aware your lord that woman, though popularly called a straight line, is really and scientifically a very thin parallelogram, possessing two dimensions like the rest of us. It is length and breadth, or thickness. Stranger. But the very fact that a line is visible implies that it possesses the other dimension. One. Aye, my lord, I just acknowledge that a woman is broad as well as long. Sheer length, we see for her breadth, which, though very slightly, is capable of measurement. Stranger, you don't understand me. I mean that when you see a woman, you ought, besides inferring her breadth, to see her length, and to see what we call her height, although that last mention is infinitesimal in your country. If a line were mere length without height, it would cease to occupy space and would become invisible. Sure, you must recognize this. Aye, I must indeed confess that I do not in the least understand your worship. When we see in Flatland see a line, we see length and brightness. If the brightness disappears, the line is extinguished, and as you can see, ceases to occupy space. I suppose that your lordship gives to brightness the title of a dimension, and that which we call bright you call high? Stranger, no indeed. By height I mean a dimension like your length, only with you. Height is not so easily perceptible, being extremely small. Aye, my lord, your assertion is easily put to the test. You say I have a third dimension, which you call height. Now, dimension implies this direction and measurement, but do but measure my height, or merely indicate the direction in which my height extends, and I will become your convert. Otherwise, your worship's own understanding must hold me excused. Heard himself. I can do neither. I convinced him. Surely plain statement of facts followed by accurate demonstration on suffice. Now, sir, listen to me. You're living on a plane. What you style flatland is a vast level surface of what I myself call a fluid, on or in the top of which you and your countrymen move about, without rising above it or falling below it. I am not a plane figure, but a solid. You call me a circle, but in reality I am not a circle, but an infinite number of circles, of size varying from a point to a circle of 13 inches in diameter, one place on the top of the other. When I cut through your plane, as I am now doing, I make in your plane a section which you very rightly call a circle. For even the sphere, which is my proper name in my own country, he manifests himself as at, at all to inhabit Flatland, must needs manifest himself as a circle. Do you not remember, for I, who see all things, discerned last night the phantasmal vision of Lineland written upon your brain? Do you not remember, I say, how, when you entered the realm of Lineland, you are compelled to manifest yourself to the king, not as a square, but as a line? That linear realm had not dimensions enough to represent the whole of you, but only a slice or section of you. In precisely the same way, your country of two dimensions is not spacious enough to represent me, while being a three, but can only exhibit a slice or section of me, which is what you call a circle. The diminished brightness of your eye indicates incredulity, but now prepare to receive proof positive of the truth of my assertions. You cannot indeed see more than one of my sections, or circles, at a time, for you have no power to raise your eye out of the plane of Flatland. But you can at least see that I, as I rise in space, some of my sections become smaller. See now, I will rise, and the effect upon your eye will be that my circle will become smaller and smaller till it dwindles to a point and finally vanishes. There was no rising that I could see, but he diminished and finally vanished. I winked once or twice to make sure that I was not dreaming, but it was no dream. For from the depths of nowhere came forth a hollow voice, close to my heart it seemed. Am I quite gone? Are you convinced now? Well, now I will gradually return to Flatland, you shall see my section become larger and larger. Every reader in Spaceland will later understand that my mysterious guest was speaking the language of truth and even of simplicity. But to me, proficient though I was in Flatland and mathematics, was by no means a simple matter. The rough diagram given above will make it clear to any. Alright, I'll actually draw this for you. So imagine, if you will, a circle. Now, imagine that this is the plane that which you're seeing as a flat figure. What the flat figure would see in Flatland would be effectively this part as a line, roughly, but you don't see like this or this. All you see is this line. Then as the orb raises and lowers, like so, you can see different parts of it in different lines. But yeah, basically all they see is this line, and that line. That's the perception that is in the book, roughly speaking. Except that it's broken up into three different spheres and three different lines. Back to reading. Rough diagram given above will make it clear to any spaceland child that the sphere, ascending in the three positions indicated there, must needs have manifested himself to be, or to any flatlander, as a circle, at first full size, and small, then at last very small indeed, approaching to a point. But to me, although I saw the facts before me, the causes were as dark as ever. All I could comprehend was that the circle had made itself smaller and even vanished, that he had now reappeared was rapidly making himself larger. When he regained his original size, he heaved a deep sigh, for he perceived from my silence that I had altogether failed to comprehend him. And indeed, I was now inclined to believe that he must be no circle at all, but some extremely clever juggler, or else that the old wives' tales were true, and that after there were such people as enchanters and magicians. After a long pause, he murmured to himself, "One resource alone remains. If I am not to resort to action, I must try the method of analogy." Then followed a still longer silence, after which he continued our dialogue. "Tell me, Mr. Mathematician, if a point moves northward and leaves a luminous wake, what name would you give the wake?" "One. A straight line." "And a straight line has how many extremities?" "Two." "Here, now conceive the northward straight line moving parallel to itself, east and west, so that every point in it leaves behind the wake of a straight line. What name would you give the figure therefore by formed?" "We would suppose that it moves for a distance equal to the original straight line. What name, I say?" "One. A square." "Here, now how many sides does a square have? How many angles?" "Four sides and four angles." Now stretch your imagination a little further. Conceive a square and flat line moving parallel to itself upward. What? What, northward? No, not northward. Upward, out of flat line altogether. If it moved northward, the southern points in square would have to move through previously occupied by north points. But that's not my meaning. I mean that every point in you, where you are a square and will serve the purpose of my illustration, every point in you, that is to say, in what you call your inside, is passed upwards through space in such a way that no point shall pass through the position previously occupied by any other point, but each point shall describe a straight line of its own. This is all according to analogy. Surely it must be clear to you. Restraining my impatience, for I was now under a strong temptation to rush blindly at my visitor, to precipitate him into space, or out flatline anywhere, to get rid of him, I replied, "For what may be the nature of the figure which I am to shape out by this motion which you're pleased to note by the word upward? I presume it is describable in language of Flatland." "Oh, certainly, it's all plain and simple, in some strict accordance of analogy. Only, by the way, you must not speak of the result as being a figure, but a solid. I'll describe it to you, or rather, not I, but analogy. We begin with a single point, which of course being itself a point, has only one terminal point. One line point produces a line of two terminal points. One line produces a square with four terminal points. Now you can give yourself the answer to your own question. 1, 2, 4 are evidently in geometrical progression. What is the next number? 1, 8. Exactly. This one square produces a something which you do not as yet know a name for, but which we call a cube with 8 terminal points. Now are you convinced? 1, I. And this creature's sides as well as angles are what you call terminal points? Here, of course, and all according to analogy, but by the way, not what you call sides, but what we call sides. You call them solids. I. And how many solids or sides would appertain to this being who I am to generate by notion by inside and upward direction, and whom we call a cube? Here, how can he ask? You're a mathematician. The side of anything is always, if I say so, one dimension behind the thing. Consequently, as there's no dimension behind a point has zero sides. A line, if I say, has two sides, for the points of a line may be called by courtesy its sides. A square has four sides, 0, 2, and 4. What progression do you call that, arithmetic? Sphere. And what is the next number? 6. Exactly. You see, you have answered your own question. The cube which you will generate will be bounded by 6 sides, that's to say 6 of your insides. You see it all now, eh? Monster! I shrieked. Be thou juggler, chatter, dreamer, devil, nor will I endure these Thy mockeries. Either thou or I must perish. In saying these words, I precipitated myself upon him. Alright, now we're in chapter 17. We are now three-fourths of the way through book. Chapter 17. How the sphere, having in vain tried words, restored to deeds. It was in vain. I brought my hardest wrangle into violent collision with the stranger, pressing him with force sufficient to have destroyed by 8 ordinary circle. But I could feel him slowly and unarrestably slipping from my contact. No edging to the right nor the left, but moving somehow out of the world, vanishing into nothing. But still I heard the intruder's voice. Here, why will you refuse the lesson of reason? I had hoped to find in you, as being a man of sense and as accomplished mathematician, a fit apostle for the gospel of 3 dimensions, which I am allowed to preach once only in 1,000 years. But now I know not how to convince you. Stay, I have it. Deeds, not words, shall proclaim the truth. Listen, my friend. I have told you that I can see from position spaceland the inside of all things you consider closed. For example, I see in yonder cupboard, near which you are standing, several what you call boxes. But like everything else in Flatland, they have no tops nor bottoms. Full of money. I see also 2 tablets of accounts. I am about to descend into that cupboard and bring to you one of those tablets. Saw you lock the cupboard half an hour ago. I know you have the key in your possession. I descend from space. The doors, you see, remain unmoved. I am in the cupboard and taking the tablet. I have it. Now I send with it. I rushed to the closet and dashed the door open. One of the tablets was gone. With a mocking laughter, the stranger appeared in the other corner of the room. At the same time, the tablet appeared upon the floor. I took it. There could be no doubt. It was missing tablet. I groaned with horror, doubting whether I was not out of my senses, but the stranger continued. Surely you must now see that by explanation no other suits the phenomena. What you call solid things are really superficial. What you call space is really nothing but a great plane. I'm in space, look down upon the insides of things of which you only see the outsides. You could leave this plane yourself if you could but summon up the necessary volition. A slight upward or downward motion would enable you to see all I can see. The higher I mount, the further I go from your plane, the more I can see, though of course I see on a smaller scale. For example, I am ascending. Now I can see your neighbor the hexagon and his family and their several apartments. I see the inside of the theater, 10 doors off, from which the audience is slowly just departing. And on the other side, a circle in his study, sitting at his books. I should come back to you. You guys are crowding proof. Hmm. Sorry, I was getting some phlegm in the throat. That was weird. As a crowning proof, what do you say about giving you a touch, just the least touch in your stomach? It will not seriously injure you, and the slight pain you may suffer cannot be compared with the mental benefit you will receive. Before I could utter a word of remonstrance, I felt a shooting pain in my inside, and a demoniacal laugh that seemed to issue from within me. A moment afterwards, the sharp agony had ceased, leaving nothing but a dull ache behind. His strength began to reappear, saying as he gradually increased his side, "There, I've not hurt you much, have I? If you're not convinced now, I don't know what will convince you. What say you?" My resolution was taken. It seemed intolerable that I should endure existence subject to the arbitrary visitation of the magician who could thus play tricks with one's very stomach. If only I could conclude in any way manage to pin him against the wall till help came. Once more I dashed my hardest angle against him, at the same time alarming the whole household by my cries for aid. I believe at the moment I announced that the stranger had sunk below our plane, and really found difficulty in rising. In any case, he remained motionless, while I, hearing as I thought, sounded some help approaching, pressed against him with doubted vigor. He shouted for assistance. A pulse of shudder ran through the sphere. This must not be. I thought I heard him say. Either he must listen to reason, or must have recourse to last resource civilization. Then, addressing me in a louder tone, he hurriedly exclaimed, "Listen! No stranger must witness what you have witnessed. Send your wife back at once before she enters the apartment." The gospel of three dimensions was not thus frustrated. Not thus must the fruits of 1,000 years of waiting be thrown away. I hear you coming. Back, back, away from me, or you must go with me. Whether you know or not, into the land of three dimensions. Fool, madman, irregular! I exclaimed. Wherever I release thee, thou shalt pay the penalty of thine impostures. Ha! Has it come to this? Thundered the stranger. Then meet your fate. Out of your plane you go. Once, twice, thrice, 'tis done. Yes, it is forbidden knowledge. Extremely forbidden. It wants to kill my insides. Geometry. Chapter 18. How I came to Spaceland and what I saw there. An unspeakable horror seized me. There was a darkness, then a dizzy, sickening sensation of sight that was not like seeing. I saw a line that was no line. Space was not space. I was myself and not myself. When I could find voice, I shrieked aloud in agony. Either this is madness or it is hell. It is neither, calmly replied the voice of the sphere. It is knowledge. It is three dimensions. Open your eye once again. Try to look steadily. I looked, and behold, a new world. There stood before me, visibly incorporate, all that I had before inferred, conjectured, dreamed of perfect circular beauty. What seemed to be the center of the stranger's form laid open to my view. Yet I could see no heart, nor lungs, nor arteries, only a beautiful harmonious something, for which I had no words. What you, my readers of Spaceland, would call the surface of the sphere. Prostrating myself mentally before my guide, I cried, "Oh, how is it, O divine, ideal of consummate loveliness and wisdom, I have seen thy inside, yet cannot discern thy heart, thy lungs, thy arteries, thy liver. What you think you see not." Replied, "It is not given to you, nor to inner being to behold my internal parts. I am of a different order of beings from those in Flatland. Were I a circle, you could discern my intestines, but I am a being, composed, as I told you before, of many circles, the many in the one, called in this country a sphere. And just as the outside of the cube is a square, so the outside of a sphere presents the appearance of a circle." He ordered, though I was by teachers in accurate utterance, I no longer chafed against it, but worshipped him in silent adoration. He continued with more mildness in his voice. "Distress not yourself if you cannot at first understand deeper mysteries of Spaceland. By degrees they'll dawn upon you. Let us begin by casting back a glance at the region whence you came. Return with me a while to the plains of Flatland, and I'll show you that which you have often reasoned and thought about, never seen with a sense of sight, a visible angle." "Impossible!" I cried. But the sphere leading the way, I followed as if in a dream, till once more his voice arrested me. "Look yonder, and behold your own pentagonal house and all of its inmates." It is this diagram that you see right here. That is the middle pentagon. That is the house. I looked below, and thus saw with physical eye all that domestic individuality which I had hitherto merely inferred with the understanding. And how poor and shadowy was the inferred conjecture in comparison with the reality which I now beheld! My four sons calmly asleep in northwestern rooms. My two orphan grandsons to the south. The servants, the butler, my daughter, all in their several apartments. Only my affectionate wife, alarmed by my continued absence, had quitted her room and was roving up and down the hall, anxiously awaiting my return. Also, the page, roused by my cries, had left his room, under a pretext ascertaining whether I had fallen somewhere in fate, was prying into the cabinet in my study. All this I could now see, not merely infer. And as we came nearer and nearer, I discerned even the contents of my cabinet, and the two chests of gold, and tablets of which the sphere had made mention. Touching my wife's distress, I would have sprung downward to reassure her. I found myself incapable of motion. Trouble not yourself about your wife, said my guide. She will not be left long in anxiety. Meanwhile, let's take a survey of Flatland. Once more I felt myself rising through the space. It was even as the sphere had said. The further we receded from the object we beheld, the larger became the field of vision. My native city, with the interior of every house and every creature therein, laid open to my view in miniature. We mounted higher and low, the secrets of the earth. My depths of mines and inmost caverns of the hills were bared before me. Awestruck at the sight of the mysteries of the earth, thus unveiled below before my unworthy eye, I said to my companion, "Behold, I have become as a god, for wise men in our country said that to see all things are to express itself omnividence, is the attribute of God alone." There was something of scorn in the voice of my teacher as he made answer. "Is it so indeed? Then the very pickpockets, cutthroats of my country be worshipped by your wise men as being gods, for there is not one of them that does not see as much as you see now. But trust me, your wise men are wrong. Aye, there is no evidence of attributes of others besides gods. Here, I do not know, but if pickpocket or cutthroat of our country can see everything that is in your country, surely there is no reason why pickpocket or cutthroat should be accepted by you as a god. This omnividence, as you call it, is not a common word in Spaceland. Does it make you more just, more merciful, less selfish, more loving? Not in the least. How does it make you more divine? When more merciful, more loving. But these are qualities of women. We know that a circle is a higher being than a straight line, so far as knowledge, wisdom, more to esteem mere affection. Here, it is not for me to classify human faculties according to merit. Yet many of the best and wisest of Spaceland think more of the affections than of the understanding. More of your despises straight lines than your beloved circles. But enough of this. Look yonder. You know that building? I looked, and afar off I saw an immense polygonal structure, which I recognized the General Assembly Hall of the States of Flatland, surrounded by dense lines of pentagonal buildings at right angles to each other, which I knew to be streets, and I perceived that I was approaching the great metropolis. "Here we descend," said my guide. It was now morning, the first hour of the first day of the 2000th year of our era. Acting as was their wont, in strict accordance with precedent, the highest circles of the realm were meeting a solemn conclave, as they had met on the first hour of the first day of the year 1000, and also the first hour of the first day of the year 0. The minutes of the previous meetings were now read by one who I recognized as my brother, a perfectly symmetrical square, and the chief clerk of the High Council. It was found recorded on each occasion that, whereas his states have been troubled by divers ill-intentioned persons pretending to have received revelations from their world, pressing to produce demonstrations where they instigated to frenzy both themselves and others, and has been for this cause unanimously resolved by the Grand Council on the first day of each millennia, special injunctions to be sent to their prefects in several districts of Flatland, to make strict search for such misguided persons. And without formality of mathematical examination, to destroy all such as were isosceles of any degree, to scourge and imprison any regular triangle, to cause any square pentagon to be sent to the district asylum, and to arrest any one of higher rank, sending him straightway to the capital to be examined and judged by the council. "You hear your fate," said the sphere to me, while the council was passing for a third time its formal resolution. "Death or imprisonment awaits the apostle of the gospel of three dimensions." "Not so," replied I. "The matter is not now so clear to me, the natural reason so palpable, that methinks I could make a child understand it. Permit me but to descend at this moment to enlighten them." "Not yet," said my guide. "The time will come for that. Meanwhile I must perform my mission. Stay thou there in thy place." Saying these words, he leaped with great dexterity into the sea, may so call it, of Flatland, right in the midst of the ring of councillors. "I come," cried he, "to proclaim that there is a land of three dimensions." I could see many of the younger councillors start back in manifest horror, as the sphere's circular section widened beneath them. On a sign from the presiding circle, who shewed not the slightest alarm or surprise. 6 assassins of low type of 6 different quarters rushed upon the sphere. We have him! They cried. No, yes, we have him still. He's going, he's gone. My lord, said the president to the junior circles of the council, there is not a single need for surprise. Secret archives which I alone have access tell me that similar occurrences happened on the last 2 millennium commencements. He will, of course, say nothing of these trifles outside the cabinet. Raising his voice, he now summoned the guards. Arrest the policemen. Gag them. You know your duty. After he had consigned their fate, the wretched policemen, ill-fed and unwilling witnesses of a state secret which they were not allowed not to be permitted to reveal, he addressed the councillors. My lords, the business of the council being concluded, I have only to wish you a happy new year. Before departing, he expressed at some length to the clerk that my excellent but most unfortunate brother, his sincere regret that, in accordance with precedent and for the sake of secrecy, he must condemn himself to perpetual imprisonment, but had his satisfaction that, unless some mention were made by him of that day's incident, his life would be spared. Well then, you see a state secret, everyone gets fucking arrested, except for Circles. We're on chapter 19 now. We have approximately 18 pages left of Flatland. How, though the sphere shewed me other mysteries of Spaceland, I still desired more what came of it. It's the name of this chapter. When I saw my poor brother led away to imprisonment, I attempted to leap down into the council chamber, desiring to intercede on his behalf. Please bid him farewell. But I found that I had no motion of my own. I was to depend on the volition of my guide, who said in gloomy tones, Heed not thy brother. Happily thou shalt have ample time hereafter to condole with him. Follow me. Once more we ascended into space. Hitherto, said the sphere, I have shown you naught save plain figures in their interiors. I must introduce you to solids and reveal to you the plan upon which they are constructed. Behold this multitude of movable square cards. See, I put one on another, not as you suppose, nor through the other, but on the other. Now a second. Now a third. See, I'm building up a solid by a multitude of squares parallel to one another. I'll actually show that off. And another. A cube. Not a perfect cube, but it is a cube. Now the solid is complete, being its size is long and broad. We call it a cube. And Flatland. Pardon me, my lord, replied I, but to my eye the appearance is of a regular figure whose inside is laid open to the view. In other words, methinks I see no solid by plane such as we infer in Flatland. Only of an irregularity which becomes some monstrous criminal, so that very sight of it baffles my eyes. True, said the sphere. It appears to you as a plane, because you are not accustomed to light and shade perspective. Just as in Flatland, a hexagon would appear as a straight line to one who has not the art of sight recognition. But in reality it is a solid, as you shall learn by the sense of feeling. He introduced me to the cube, and I found that this marvelous being was indeed no plane, but a solid, and that he was endowed with 6 plane sides and 8 terminal points called solid angles. I remember saying to the sphere that just such a creature as this would be formed by a square moving, in space, parallel to himself. I rejoice to think that so insignificant a creature as I could, in some sense, be called the progenitor of so illustrious an offspring. But still, I cannot fully understand the meaning of what my teacher told me concerning light and shade and perspective. I did not hesitate to put my difficulties before. Were I to give the sphere's explanation of these matters, succinct and clear as though it was, it'd be tedious to an inhabitant of space who knows these things already. Suffice it, by his lucid statements and by changing position of objects and lights, allowing me to feel the subtle objects even his own sacred person, he at last made all things clear to me, so I could now readily distinguish between a circle and a sphere, a plane figure and a solid. This was the climax, the paradise, my strange eventful history. Henceforth I have to relate to the story of my miserable fall. Most miserable, yet surely most undeserved. For why should the thirst for knowledge be aroused, only be disappointed and punished? My volition shrinks from the painful task of recalling my humiliation. Yet, like a second Prometheus, I will endure this and worse. If by any means I may arouse in the interiors of plain and solid humanity a spirit of rebellion against conceit which would limit our dimensions to 2 or 3 or any number short of infinity. Away, then, with all personal considerations. We continue to the end, as I began, without further digressions or anticipations, pursuing the plain path of dispassionate history. The exact facts, the exact words, they are all burnt in upon my brain, shall be set down without alteration of an iota. Let my readers judge between me and destiny. The sphere would willingly have continued his lessons by indoctrinating me in the confirmation of all regular solids, cylinders, cones, pyramids, pen, pentahedron, pentahedrons, hexahedrons, dodecahedrons, and spheres. I mentioned to interrupt him. Not that I was weary of knowledge. Not that I was weary of knowledge. On the contrary, thirst yet deeper and full curiosity offering me. Pardon me, said I, O thou whom I must no longer address as perfection of all beauty, but let me beg thee to vouchsafe thy servant a sight of thy interior. My what? Aye, my interior, thy stomach, thy insides. Whence this ill-timed impertinent request? What mean you by saying that I am no longer a perfection of all being? Aye, my lord, as your wisdom has taught me to aspire to one even more great, more beautiful, more close approximation to perfect in yourself. As you yourself, superior to all Flatland forms, combine many circles in one. So doubtless there is one above you who combines many spheres in one supreme existence, surpassing even the solids of Spaceland. And as we who are now in space look down on Flatland and see the insides of all things, so of a certain there is yet above us some higher, purer region which shall thus surely propose to lead me. Of whom I shall always call, everywhere in all dimensions, my priest, philosopher, and friend. Some yet more spacious in space, some more dimensional dimensionality, from the vantage ground of which we shall look deep together upon the revealed insides of solid things, and where thine own intestines, and those of thy kindred spheres, will lie exposed to the view of the poor wandering exile from Flatland, to whom so much has already been vouchsafed. Sphere. Phew! Stuff! Enough of this trifling. The time is short, and much remains to be done before you are fit to proclaim the gospel of 3 dimensions to your blind, benighted countrymen Flatland. 1. I. Nay, gracious teacher, deny me not what I know is in thy power to perform. Grant me but one glimpse of thy interior, and I am satisfied forever. Remain henceforth thy docile pupil, thy unemancipable slave. Pray receive all thy teachers feed upon the words fall from my lips. Well then, content and silence you. Let me say at once, I would shew you what you wish if I could. If I cannot. Would you have me turn my stomach inside out to oblige you? But my lord has shown me the intestines of all my countrymen in the land of 2 dimensions by taking me with him to the land of 3. What therefore borders to be now, then take his servant on a second journey into the blessed region of 4th dimension, where I shall look down with him once more upon this land of 3 dimensions, see the inside of a 3 dimensional house, the secrets of the solid earth, the treasures of the mines of Spaceland, the intestines of every solid living creature, even the noble and adorable spheres. Here, but where is this land of 4 dimensions? I know not, but my but doubtless my teacher knows. Here, not I. There is no such land. The very idea of it is utterly inconceivable. Aye, not inconceivable, my lord. To me, therefore, less inconceivable to my master. I despair not that, even here in this region of 3 dimensions, your lord's lordship may make the fourth dimension visible to me, just as in the land of 2 dimensions my teacher's skill would fain have opened the eyes of his blind servant to the visible presence of third dimension, though I saw it not. Let me recall the past. Was I not taught below that when I saw a line inferred a plane, I in reality saw a third unrecognized dimension, not the same as brightness, called height? And does it not now follow that in this region, when I say plane and infer a solid, I really see a fourth unrecognized dimension, not the same as color, but existent, though indivisible and capable of measurement? Besides this, there's the argument for analogy of figures. Your analogy? Nonsense. What analogy? Your lordship tempts his servant to see whether he remembers your revelations imparted to him. Trifle not with me, O Lord. I thirst for more knowledge. Doubtless we cannot see the other higher spaceland now, because we have no eye in our stomachs. For just as there was the realm of Flatland, though that poor puny landmark could neither turn to left nor right to discern it, just as there was close at hand and touching my frame the land of 3 dimensions, though I blindly senseless, blind sen- ah, though I, blind senseless wretch, had no power to touch it, no eye in my interior to discern it. So of a surety that there is a fourth dimension, which my lord perceives with the inner eye of thought, and that it must exist, my lord himself has taught me. Or can he have forgotten what he himself imparted to his servant? In 1 dimension, did not a moving point produce a line of 2 terminal points? In 2 dimensions, did not a moving line produce a square of 4 terminal points? In 3 dimensions, did not a moving square did not this eye of mine behold it? That must be a cube with 8 terminal points. In 4 dimensions, shall not a moving cube, a loss for analogy and a loss for progress of truth. If it be not so, shall not, I say, the motion of a divine cube result in a still more divine organization of 16 terminal points? Jesus. Behold the infallible confirmation of the series 2, 4, 8, 16. Is not this geometrical progression? Is not this, if I quote my lord's own words, strictly according to analogy? Again, was I not taught by my lord that as a line there are 2 bounding points, in a square there are 4 bounding points, in a cube there must be 6 bounding squares? Behold once more the confirming series 2, 4, 6. Is not this an arithmetic progression? Consequently, does it not of necessity follow that the more divine offspring of the divine cube in the line 4 dimensions must have 8 bounding cubes? Is not this, as my lord has taught to me before, strictly according to analogy? O Lord, my lord, behold, I cast myself in faith upon conjecture, not knowing the facts, and I appear to your lordship to confirm or deny my logical anticipations. If I am wrong, I yield. I no longer demand a fourth dimension. But if I am right, my lord, listen to reason. I'll just ask, therefore, is it or is it not the fact that ere now your countrymen also witnessed the descent of beings in a higher order than our own, entering closed rooms, even as your lordship entered mine, without the opening of doors or windows, and appearing and vanishing at will? On a reply to this question, I am ready to stake everything. Deny it, and I am henceforth silent. Only vouchsafe an answer. Sphere. After a pause. It is reported so, but men are divided in opinion as to the facts. Even granting the facts, they explain them in different ways. In any case, however great may be the number of different explanations, no one has adopted or suggested the theory of a fourth dimension. Therefore, pray have done with this trifling, let us return to business. I was certain of it. I was certain my anticipations would be fulfilled. And now have patience with me as to answer yet one more question, best of teachers. Those who have thus appeared, no one knows whence, and have returned, no one knows whither. Have they also contracted their sections vanished somehow into that more spacious space, which I now entreat you to conduct me? They have vanished, certainly, if they ever appeared. But most people that saw these visions rose from the thought, you will not understand me, from the brain, perturbed angularity of the seer. Say they so? Oh, believe them not. Or if it indeed be so, this outer space is really thought land. and take me to that blessed region where I, in thought, shall see the insides of all solid things. There, before my ravaged eye, a cube, moving in some altogether new direction, but strictly according to analogy, so as to make every particle of its interior pass through a new kind of space, wake of its own. Shall create a still more perfect perfection than himself, with 16 terminal extra solid angles, 8 solid cubes for his perimeter. And once there, shall we stay our upward course. In that blessed region of 4 dimensions, shall we linger on the threshold of fifth, not enter therein? Ah, no. Let's resolve that our ambition shall restore our corporeal ascent. Then, yielding in our intellectual onset, the 8 gates of the 6th dimension shall fly open, after that a 7th, and then an 8th. How long I should have continued I know not. In vain did the sphere, his voice of thunder, reiterate his command of silence, and threatened me with the direst penalties if I persisted. Nothing could stem the flood of my ecstatic aspirations. Perhaps I was to blame, but indeed I was intoxicated with recent draughts of truth which he himself had introduced me. However, the end was not long coming. My words cut short by a crash outside, a simultaneous crash inside me, which impelled me through to space with velocity that precluded speech. Down, down, down. I was rapidly descending, and I knew that return to Flatland was my doom. One glimpse, one last never to be forgotten glimpse, I had of the dole of the wilderness, which was now to become my universe again, spread out before me. Then a darkness. Then the final, all-consuming thunder peal. When I came to myself, I was once more a common creeping square, my study at home, listening to the peace cry of my approaching wife. How the spirit encouraged me in a vision. I had less than a minute for reflection. I felt by a kind of instinct that I must conceal my services to my wife. Not that I apprehended at the moment any danger for her to divulge my secret, but I knew that any woman in Flatland, the nerve of my ventures must needs be unintelligible. So I endeavored to reassure her by some story, then for the occasion, that I had accidentally fallen through the trapdoor of his cellar, and had there lain stunned. The southward attraction in our country is so slight that even to a woman my tale necessarily appeared extraordinary and well nigh incredible. But my wife, whose good sense far exceeds that of the average of her sex, who perceived that I was unusually excited, did not argue with me on the subject, but insisted I was ill and required repose. I was glad of the excuse for retiring to my chamber to think quietly over what happened. When I was last by myself, a drowsy sensation fell on me, but before my eyes closed I endeavored to reproduce the 3rd dimension, and especially the process by which a cube is constructed for the motion of a square. It was not so clear that I could have wished, but I remembered that it must be upward and yet not northward. I determined steadfastly to retain these words as a clue with, a firmly grasped, could not fail to guide me to the solution. So mechanically repeating, like a charm, the words, upward, not yet northward, I fell into a sound resounding sleep. During my slumber I had a dream. I thought I was once more by the side of the sphere, whose lustrous hue betokened that he had exchanged his wrath against me for perfect lackability. We were moving together towards a bright but infamously small point, which my master directed my attention. As we approached, methought there issued from it a slight humming noise, as from one of your Spaceland blue bottles, only less resonant by far, so slight indeed that even in the perfect stillness of the vacuum through which we soared, the sound reached not our ears till we checked our flight at a distance from it, something under 20 human diagonals. Look yonder, said my guide. In Flatland thou hast lived. Of Land thou hast received a vision. Thou hast soared with me to the heights of Spaceland. Now, in order to complete the range of thy experience, I conduct thee downward to lowest depth of existence, even to the point of Pointland, the abyss of no dimensions. Behold yon miserable creature. That point is a being like ourselves, but confined to the non-dimensional gulf. He is himself his own world, his own universe. Of any other than himself he can form no conception. He knows not length, not breadth, nor height, for he has no experience of them. He has no constancy of the number two, nor has he a thought of plurality, for his himself is one in all, being really nothing. Yet mark his perfect self-contentment, hence learn this lesson. that to be self-contented is to be vile and ignorant, and that to aspire is better to be blindly and potently happy. Now listen. He ceased, and there arose from the little buzzing creature a tiny, low, monotonous but distinct tinkling, as from one of your Spaceland phonographs, which I got these words: "Infinite beatitude of existence. It is, and there's none else beside it." "What," said I, "does the creature mean by it?" "He means himself," said the sphere. "Have you not noticed before now that babies and babyish people who cannot distinguish themselves in the world speak of themselves in the third person? But hush. It fills all space," continued the little soliloquizing creature. "And what it fills it is. What it thinks, that it utters, what it utters, that it hears, and it itself is a thinker, utterer, hearer, thought, word, audition. It is the one, yet the all in all. The happiness, the happiest of being." "Can you not startle the little thing out of its complacency?" said I. "Tell me what it really is," he told me, "revealed to it the narrow limitations of Point Land, and lead up to something higher. That is no easy task," said my master. "Try you." Hereon, raising my voice to the uttermost, I addressed the point as follows: "Silence, silence, contemptible creature! You'll call yourself the all in all, but you're the nothing. Talking universe is a mere speck in a line. The line is mere shadows compared with—" "Hush, hush, he has said enough," interrupted the sphere. "Now listen, and mark the effect of your harangue on the King of Pointland." The lustre of the monarch, who beamed more brightly than ever upon hearing my words, shewed clear that he retained his complacency, and I had hardly ceased when he took up his strain again. The joy, the thought! What can it not achieve by thinking? Its own thought coming to itself, suggests of its disparagement, thereby to embrace its happiness, sweet rebellion, stir up the result in triumph. Divine creature of power of all in one! The joy of being!" "You see," said my teacher, "how little of your words have done. So far as the monarch understands them all, he accepts them as his own, for he cannot conceive of any other except himself, and plumes himself upon the variety of its thought as an instance of creative power. Let us leave this god of Pointland to the ignorant fruition of his omnipresence and omniscience. Nothing that you or I can do can rescue him from his self-satisfaction." After this, as we floated gently back to Flatland, I could hear the mild voice of my companion pointing to the moral of my vision, and stimulating me to aspire, and to teach others to aspire. He had been angered at first, he confessed, by my ambition to soar dimensions above the third, but since then he had received fresh insight. He was not too proud to acknowledge his error to a pupil. Then he proceeded to initiate me into mysteries yet higher than those I had witnessed, showing me how to construct extra solids by the motion of solids, and double extra solids by the motion of extra solids, and all strictly according to the analogy, all by methods so simple, so easy, as to be patent even to the female sex. Really Victorian times. Chapter 21. We're near the end, folks. We have 8 pages left. I awoke rejoicing. Chapter 21. How I tried to teach the theory of 3 dimensions to my grandson, and with what success. I awoke rejoicing, and began to reflect on the glorious career before me. I go forth, methought, at once to evangelize the whole Flatland, and to women and soldiers, such a gospel of 3 dimensions to be proclaimed. I begin with my wife. Hmm. Just as I decided on the plan of my operations, I heard the sound of many voices in the street commanding silence. Then followed a louder voice. It was a herald's proclamation. Listening attentively, I recognized the words of the resolution of the council, enjoining the arrest, imprisonment, or execution of anyone who should pervert the minds of the people by delusions, and by professing to have received revelations from another world. I reflected. This danger was not to be trifled with. It would be better to avoid by admitting all mention of revelation, and by proceeding on the path of my demonstration, which after all seemed so simple and so conclusive that nothing would be lost by discarding the former means. Upward, not northward, was the clue to the whole proof. It seemed to be fairly clear before I fell asleep. When I first awoke, fresh from my dream, it appeared as patent as arithmetic, but somehow it did not seem to me quite so obvious now. When my wife entered the room, opportunity just at that moment, I decided that, after we had exchanged a few words of commonplace conversation, not begin with her. My pentagonal sons were men of character and standing, and physicians with no mean reputation. Not great at mathematics, and in that respect unfit for my purpose. But it occurred to me that a young and docile hexagon, with a mathematical turn, would be most suitable pupil. Why, therefore, not make my worst friends my little precocious grandson, whose casual remarks on a meeting of 3 to the power of 3 had met with the approval of the sphere? Discussing the matter with him, a mere boy, I should be in perfect safety, for he would know nothing of the proclamation of the council, whereas I could not feel sure that my sons, so greatly did their patriotism reverence for circles predominate over mere blind affection, might not feel compelled to hand me over to the prefect if they found me seriously maintaining the seditious heresy of the third dimension. First thing they'd done was satisfy in some way the curiosity of my wife. He naturally wished to know something of the reasons which Circle had desired a mysterious interview, and of the means by which he had entered the house. Without entering into the details the elaborate account gave her, account, I fear, not quite so consistent with truth as my readers in Spaceland might desire, I woke up in the basement. I must be content with saying that I succeeded at last in persuading her to return quietly to her household duties, without eliciting from me any reference to the world of three dimensions. This done, I immediately sent for my grandson, for, to confess the truth, I felt that all I had seen and heard was in strange way slipping away from me, like the image of a half-grasped, tantalizing dream. Nor did I say my skill in making a first disciple. When my grandson entered the room, I carefully secured the door, then sitting down by his side to take our mathematical tablets, or as we call them, lines, I told him we would resume the lesson of yesterday. I told him once more about how a point by motion in one dimension produces a line, and how a straight line in two dimensions produces a square. After this, forcing a laugh, I said, "Now, you scamp, you want me to make me believe that a square may in the same way be motion upward, not upward. Produce another figure, a sort of actual square in dimensions. Say that again, you young rascal." Hmm. At this moment, we heard once more the herald's "Oh yes, oh yes!" outside in the street proclaiming the resolution of the council. Young though he was, my grandson, who was unusually intelligent for his age, and bred up in perfect reverence for the authority of the circles, took in the situation of the cuteness for which I was quite unprepared. He remained silent till the last words of the proclamation had died away, then bursting into tears. "Dear grandpapa," he said, "that was only my fun. Of course I mean nothing at all by it, and we did not know anything then about the new law. I don't think I said anything about the third dimension. I'm sure I did not say one word about upward, not northward. But that would be such nonsense, you know. How could a thing move upward, not northward? Upward, not northward? If I were a baby, I could not be so absurd as that. How silly is this? Not at all silly, said I, losing my temper. Here, for example, I take this square. Hmm, not at all silly. Here, for example, I take this square. At the word, I grasp the movable square. It's lying at hand. I move it, you see, not northward, but yes, I move it upward. As say, not northward, but I move it somewhere. Not exactly like this, but somehow. Here I brought my sentence to an conclusion, shaking the square about in a purposeless manner, much to the amusement of my grandson, who burst out laughing louder than ever, declared that I was not teaching him, but joking with him. And so saying, he unlocked the door and ran out of the room. Thus ended my first attempt to convert a pupil to the gospel of three dimensions. Well, we're on to the last chapter. I then tried to diffuse the theory of three dimensions by other means, and of the result. My failure of my grandson did not encourage me to communicate the secret to others of my household, yet neither was I led by it to despair of success. Only I saw that I must not wholly rely on the catchphrase "upward, not northward," but this must rather endeavor to seek a demonstration by setting before the public a clear view of the whole subject, and for this purpose it seemed necessary to resort to writing. So I devoted several months in privacy to the composition of a treatise on the mysteries of three dimensions. Only with a view of evading the law, if possible, I spoke not of a physical dimension, but of a thought land whence In theory, a figure could look down upon Flatland and see simultaneously the insides of all things. However, it was possible that there might be summoned to exist a figure environment, as it were, six figures containing 8 terminal points, or 6 squares containing 8 terminal points. But in writing this book, I found myself sadly hampered by the impossibility of drawing such diagrams as were necessary for my purpose, for, of course, in our country of Flatland, there are no tablets but lines, and no diagrams but lines, all in one straight line, only distinguishable by the difference of size and brightness, so that, when I finished my treatise, which I entitled Thought Through Flatland to Thoughtland, I could not feel certain that many would understand my meaning. Meanwhile, my life was under a cloud. All pleasures palled upon me. All sights tantalized tempted me to outspoken treason, because I could not but compare to what I saw in two dimensions of what it really was, if seen in three. Darling, your friend for making my comparisons aloud. I neglected my clients and my own business to give myself to the contemplation of the mysteries which I had once beheld, yet which I could impart to no one, and found daily more difficult to reproduce even before my own mental vision. One day, about 11 months after my return to Spaceland, I tried to see a cube with my eye closed, but failed, and though I succeeded afterwards, I was not then quite certain, nor have I been afterwards, that I exactly realized the original. This made me more melancholy than before, and determined me to take some step, yet what I knew not. I felt that I would have been willing to sacrifice my life for the cause, if thereby I could have produced conviction. But if I could not convince my grandson, I could convince the highest and most developed circles in the land. And yet at times my spirit was too strong for me, and I gave vent to dangerous utterances. Already I was considered heterodox, if not reasonable, and I was keenly alive to the danger of my position. Nevertheless, I could not at times refrain from bursting out into suspicious or half seditious utterances, even among the highest political and circular society. When, for example, the question arose about the treatment of those lunatics who said they received the power of seeing the insides of things, I would quote the saying of the ancient circle who declared that prophets and inspired people are always considered by the majority to be mad. I could not help occasionally dropping such expressions as the eye that discerns the interior things, and the all-seeing land. Once or twice before I even let fall the written terms, the third and fourth dimensions. At last, to complete a series of minor indiscretions, at a meeting of our local speculative society held at the palace of the prefect himself, some extremely silly person, having read an elaborate paper examining the precise reasons why Providence had a limited number of dimensions to two, and why the attribute of omnipotence is assigned to the supreme alone, I so far forgot myself as to give an extra account of the whole my voyage from the sphere into Spaceland, into the assembly hall of our metropolis, and in space again, of my return home, and of everything that I had seen and heard, in fact and vision. At first, indeed, I pretended I was describing the imaginary experience of a fictitious person, but my enthusiasm soon forced me to throw off all disguise, and finally, in a fervent peroration, I exhorted all my hearers to invest themselves in precious and become believers in third dimension. Need I say that I was at once arrested and taken for the council? Next morning, staying in the very place where all but a very few months ago the sphere had stood in my company, I was allowed to begin and continue my narration unquestioned and uninterrupted. But from the first I foresaw my fate, for the present, noting that a guard of the better sort placement was intense, of angularity little, if at all under 50 degrees, or then to be relieved before I began my defense, by an inferior class of 2 or 3 degrees. I knew only too well what that meant. I was to be executed or imprisoned. My story was kept secret from the world by the simultaneous instruction of the officials who had heard it. This being the case, the president desired to substitute the cheaper for the more expensive victims. After I concluded my defense, the president, perhaps perceiving that some juniors had also been moved by the evidence earnestness, asked me 2 questions. 1. Whether I could indicate the direction which I meant when I used the words upward, not northward. 2. Whether I could bring by any diagrams or descriptions other than the immersion on imaginary sides and angles indicate the figure I was pleased to call a cube. I declared I could say nothing more, that I must commit myself to the truth, whose cause would surely prevail in the end. The president replied that he quite concurred in my sentiment, and I could not do better. I must be sentenced to perpetual imprisonment, but if by truth intended that I should emerge from prison and evangelize the world, Spirits might be trusted to bring that result to pass. Meanwhile, I should be subjected to no discomfort that was not necessary to preclude escape. Unless I forfeited the privilege by misconduct, I should be occasionally permitted to see my brother, who had preceded me to my prison. 7 years have elapsed, and I am still a prisoner, and, if I except the occasional visits to my brother, be barred from all companionship save that of my jailers. My brother is one of the best of squires, just sensible, careful, and not without fraternal affection. Yet I confess that my weekly interviews, at least in one respect, caused me the bitterest pain. He was present when the sphere manifested himself in the council chamber. He saw the sphere's changing sections. He heard the explanation of the phenomena thus given to its circles. Since that time, scarcely a week had passed during 7 whole years, without his hearing from me a repetition of the part I played in that manifestation, together with ample descriptions of all the phenomena in Spaceland, the arguments for the existence of solid things derivable from an analogy. Yet, I take shame to be forced to confess it. My brother has not yet grasped the nature of the third dimension. Frankly, avows his disbelief in the existence of a sphere. Hence, I am absolutely destitute of converts, and for aught that I can see, the money of revelation has been made to me for nothing. Prometheus up in Spaceland was bound for bringing down fire from mortals, but I, poor Flatland Prometheus, lie here in prison for bringing down nothing to my countrymen. Yet I exist in the hope that these memoirs, some manner, I know not now, not how, may find their way to the minds of humanity in some dimension, and may stir up a race of rebels who shall refuse to be confined to limited dimensionality. That is the hope of my brighter moments. Alas, it is not always so. Heavily weighs upon Heavily weighs on me at times the burdensome reflection that I cannot honestly say I am confident as to the exact shape of the once seen off-regretted cube, and in my nightly visions the mysterious precept, upward not northward, haunts me like a soul-devouring sphinx. It is part of the martyrdom which I endure for the cause of the truth that there are seasons of mental weakness, when cubes and spheres flit away into the background scarce possible existences, where the land of three dimensions seems almost as visionary as the land of one or none. Nay, when even this hard wall that bars me from my freedom, these very tablets from which I am writing, and all the substantial realities of Flatland itself, appear no better than the offspring of a diseased imagination, or the baseless fabric of a dream. That, my friend, is the end of Flatland. Well, do you feel enlightened about shapes, about things? I don't know. I feel like part of my brain broke there, actually. I mean, I understand dimensions. That when you move a cube, or when you move a square, it forms a cube. Cube. But yeah, that is the end here. I'm going to find a good place to go. Actually, there doesn't seem to be a very appropriate place to go. What I'll do at this point is actually, uh, yeah, we're going to just so I followed this one a while ago, KB Alpha. They are about to stream some Destiny. Should I ship you over there to kick off their stream? Thank you for stopping by. We hope to see you again. Y'all have a good day. I will see you again later today. Flatland. Next time, the Doodles.